Call to order Hastings on Hudson Board of Ed meeting, October 21, 2019. Welcome. Welcome to the board. Okay, we've got a few presentations tonight from facilities, architects. They're here. We've got some great pictures. I only see the top one, but I'm sure there's more underneath it. And we've got a presentation on diversity and inclusion from Janice Mateo Toledo, so look forward to that. And before getting into the presentations, I will pass the meeting over to Dr. Henning Piedmont.
Sure.
For some announcements.
Absolutely. Good evening, Board of Education, Board President, Vice President, trustees. Just a few announcements, and I'm actually going to defer some of the announcements that are at the very top of our agenda, which are also disseminated in our happenings document to the public. So there are a number of things that are going on. So I'm not going to go over those because I want to make sure that Ms. Berman shares something very exciting that she recently did this week that was shared in a previous, our last board meeting, something that I think is going to be exciting for everyone. And it's just an update on her Harvard Graduate School of Education presentation or pitch of a really innovative idea that she came up with. And I've asked that she talk about that experience as well as sort of what was the origin of that and why was that so important. But before getting to that, I want to thank the middle school for putting on just an incredible performance of Music Man Jr. It was outstanding. Funny, talented, extraordinary. Bravo. If you missed it, your loss. They were just stunning and just so much fun. So thank everyone who was involved with that. I also want to let you know that tomorrow we are disseminating a message to our parents to give them a heads up to take a look at the information in the parent portal with regards to phone numbers, text messaging numbers, for the purposes of our emergency messaging system. So tomorrow a message will be disseminated basically asking parents to please go into the portal to update any of the emergency contact information. And in preparation for a test message that's going to be disseminated on Monday, October 28th at 7 p.m. As a way of making sure that all of the phone numbers and method, all the ways in which we would want to send you a message, let's say on the first snow day, to let you know that what to do or not to do. So that you want to make sure that you do that, and as I said, that information will be disseminated in all the ways in which we have your phone numbers available, email, text, phone, etc. We'll also send one to our own employees just to make sure that the internal numbers are also up to date. So you'll want to pay attention to that and go into the portal if you need to. And finally, I wanted to let you know that New York State and Google are in agreement with the regulations under Ed Law 2D with regards to privacy and protection of student information. They've agreed to Ed Law 2D. And we'll be getting some more information about that and making that available to you. But that's pretty significant for anyone who had any concerns about Google adhering to the compliance with regards to Ed Law 2D. So thank you for that, and I want to turn the next portion of my minutes over to Ms. Berman to share her really exciting news with us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Henning Piedmont, and I won't take too much of this meeting because we do have some great presentations for the whole community, but Dr. Henning Piedmont asked me to update you all since she announced last board meeting that I was selected to participate in an Early Education Innovation Challenge. It was sponsored by the Saul Zantz Early Education Initiative, which is part of Harvard Graduate School of Education. Anyone nationwide could have participated, and I was one of, in my category, 5 participants. Several hundred people solicited ideas for this challenge, and I found out when I went this past week that I was the only one there as a finalist who was representing myself. Everyone else there was there as part of a nonprofit that existed, whether it was from Georgia or California or Colorado. So was quite daunting to be there just on my own, representing my own idea, but really, really fulfilling to be there. And Valerie asked me to just speak on what inspired my idea. What really inspired my idea was the fact that play for learning of early children has really declined. And what I argued and what I argue for, back in 2009, there was research published called Crisis in the Kindergarten. And it was quite innovative research. It was presented to Congress. And one of my mentors at Sarah Lawrence, Marjorie Franklin, participated in that research. And it really impacted me to go into education, to be a teacher, to work as a kindergarten teacher, to be an administrator in early childhood setting. And last year, the American Association of Pediatrics published a new report called The Power of Play. And not much has changed. And in fact, things have gotten worse because now factors within schools and the pressures that came are now also impacted by technologies and different lifestyles at home. So not only are there fewer opportunities in early childhood classrooms, in preschools and kindergartens for play to be center for a child's life, now in family life, that is a fact as well. Whether it's because of screen-based devices or child programs that are more adult-directed, like sports programming or after-school programming that's very directive. So my idea was to create a new community-based opportunity for children to have play as the center of their life. And my idea was for a library of play, just like a family would belong to a public library that would belong to a library for play. And it was a great opportunity to share that idea. I did not receive a prize for that idea, which is fine. But it really sparked conversations, and it was great to hear about the initiatives that did win awards. And it was something that's very dear to my heart. It motivates me to be on the board, to really think about how schools can redirect energies to bring more play opportunities for children and not think of it as a break from learning, but really make it central to the youngest learners' experiences in home, in their community, and at school.
That's pretty awesome. Thank you again for doing that on behalf of Children in Play. Just a couple other items I wanted to draw your attention to. Tomorrow is Family University at the high school. Very, very important, a great opportunity to come out and hear some speakers. It's free, great fruit, food, so bring your neighbors, bring everyone. I think this is the second or third year? Second year, so it's really wonderful and outstanding that that's taking place here. So I want to thank all the organizers, our high school administrative team.
How's the attendance looking so far? Good?
The middle school has really jumped on board and helped us as well. This has been a lot of the back-end work. We had about 400 registered.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome. That's great. That's great news. Thank you for all of that great work. It's a really important, as I said, venue for adult learning, so thank you. The Theater Arts Committee is meeting at the high school tomorrow. There's a SEPTA Community Conversations meeting taking place on the 24th at 6:30. On October 25th and Friday, it's a late start for all schools, so Hillside is 9:30 and Farragut in the high school is 9:35. On the 29th, there's a policy committee meeting here in the district conference room at 10:30. October 30th through November 2nd is the PTSA New Book Fair. On October 30th, the SEPTA Community Conversations, another one which will be at the high school at 7 p.m. On October 31st, yes, Hillside Halloween Parade. So I've heard it's quite the event, so I am so sure that, it's going to be very exciting. And I think there's also an event happening at the high school or competition around the costume, maybe not? Okay. All right. Next year, right? It's always another year. There's a varsity fall sports banquet on November 1st, 6:30, junior formal on November 4th, and then again on the 4th, another board meeting, so come on back here. A few highlights, if you take a look here. Thank you, Janine, for pulling these together. Family University, as I stated, some of the speakers, really awesome. It's free, and there's great food, lots of learning. wonderful Music Man Junior here. A lot of great talent here coming up to the high school to continue the tradition in our community. And the Writers' Workshop at Hillside, really awesome work led by both Amy and John and the wonderful teachers at Hillside. They're working with Gravity Goldberg, who is leading them in implementing balanced literacy. They're starting their writing units, focus on writing this year. So the students are engaged in conferencing and working together, doing independent reading and filling their writer's notebooks. So thank you very much. Oh, one more, sorry.
There's a few more.
One more. This is a wonderful photo of one of our educators who actually, besides having an amazing background, had a conversation with a parent who actually was the parent who encountered this very large specimen that is now in the Guinness Book of World Records. They were just talking about it when in this photo, and actually the parent went there and was on her trip and saw this very large sand dollar. So that's pretty cool. And then the Hastings varsity boys soccer team, awesome win, 5-0. That's against Albertus Magnus in Rockland. And yes, the football team.
Wow.
Win
All
big,
right.
42-14 over Croton Harmon. I love Croton Harmon, but you know what? That's amazing. Quite amazing. So thank you very much for all of our athletes, and we'll see you again, as I said, on Monday, November 4th. Thank you.
It looks like the next board recognition is next.
Well, there you go. So,
It's self-recognized, but I assume that's not.
it's not in order. It isn't. So, just in case you wondered, these 7 members here who serve as the Board of Education do so because they are dedicated to the success of all children in the school district. They obviously are not getting paid to do this. They do it out of their own sense of social justice and being able to make sure that they're influencing outcomes. I mean, obviously, they are not physically here to do the work. They hire people to do that work, but it's their ideas, their philosophy, and their commitment to children that drive all decisions that are made. And most people don't know the amount of time that you spend doing what you do, but it takes a tremendous amount of commitment and, as I said, a deep sense of integrity to be able to stand behind the decisions that you make, and some are not popular decisions. Sometimes you get ambushed in the cereal aisle at the supermarket, or some other unpleasantry because you are standing up for all children. And so on behalf of all of us in the school district, I'm going to read a proclamation from our governor, which I think does in fact characterize some of the things that I've said. So whereas each year School Board Recognition Week is observed by more than 700 school boards in school districts throughout the Empire State, and whereas our state's public education system is designed to meet the educational needs of all children and to empower them to become competent, productive contributors to society and an ever-changing world, and whereas members of the local school boards are dedicated to children, learning, community, and devote many hours of service to elementary and secondary public education as they continually strive for improvement, excellence, and progress in education, recognizing that all children can be successful learners, especially when education is tailored to the individual needs of the child. And whereas local school board members are strong advocates for public education and are responsible for communicating the needs of the school district to the public and the public's expectation to the district by working closely with parents, educational professionals, and other community members to create the educational vision we all hold for today's students and those in the future. And whereas the members of New York State's local school boards respond to the educational needs of the communities they serve and help ensure the solid foundation of our school system. And in doing so, these leaders help strengthen our state's educational system and improve future prospects for all of our children. And whereas during October 21st through the 25th, 2019, Special activities and programs will be held in communities across New York State in observance of School Board Recognition Week, and it is fitting to join in acknowledging the commitment and contributions of the members of local school boards. Now, therefore, I, Andrew M. Cuomo, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim October 21st to the 25th, 2019 as School Board Recognition Week. So I hereby have met the responsibilities under our esteemed governor to share this proclamation with the board. And then our sort of a token of our esteem and appreciation is in the lovely bag. If you would take out what's in the lovely bag, green bag. It is a mug. It has our mascot. The yellow jacket, not the bee. It's not a bee. It's a yellow jacket and with a few treats. And as I said, it's a token of our appreciation. And I would like everyone to join in launching this week of School Board Appreciation Week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to administrative comments. Pass it over to Melissa and Maureen.
Okay. So last week, both the middle school and high school ELA departments came together, and Gail and Lou outlined our potential target status. And we discussed general next steps around the data analysis work, around individualized interventions and that need, and then shifts that were necessary also around student scheduling looking forward. Google training continues, and we have had a very comprehensive approach to that. Our migration has been ongoing and thus far successful. And we've had individual sign-up sessions. We had a consultant visit last week and conduct differentiated trainings that were focused on what people signed up for. So that included docs and Gmail, contact sheets, forms, email groups, contact lists, uploading Microsoft documents to the drive as Google Docs. So basically whatever folks needed, we wanted to make sure that we were being responsive and our trainers knew in advance and made sure that they could meet those needs. On October 15th, our first meeting of the District Curriculum Teaching and Learning Committee took place. We talked about the purpose of the committee, worked with the group to establish norms, and engage participants in a perspective-taking exercise on internal and external perceptions regarding curriculum instruction and assessment on all 3 school levels. And I'll be sharing more about that specifically moving forward. Our monthly Chair Council meetings have begun. Our first session focused on sharing the goals of the leadership team so that the system knew what the leadership goals were that we have presented also to the board so that everyone could be aligned. Establishing a goal for Chair Council and also exploring the possibility of having elementary team coordinators join and what implications that would have on the group so that there's representation throughout K-12 at those meetings. Each department chair is going to be identifying a teaching and learning goal for the school year, and we're looking forward to future sessions together. The Professional Learning Committee is going to be focusing this year on the professional learning of the adults in the system, and we had our first meeting of the Professional Learning Committee. And I asked participants to read an article that was called Planning Professional Learning by Gusky, and that was really meant to ground us and to be thinking about what adult learners need as they're moving forward and thinking about professional learning experiences that are going to be innovative and enjoyable. We unpacked agreements, arguments, assumptions, and aspirations that related to the article. So lots of work is ongoing, and looking forward to some deeper updates moving forward.
How many, just real quick, how many people are the professional learning committee?
We had about 20. I can look
Across all
actually.
3
Yeah,
schools?
we had
Pretty
about.
evenly split across all 3 schools?
We had representation from all 3 schools. Off the top of my head, fairly even, but I'll dip into my notes while we're
Great.
sitting.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Valerie and I met this past week to go over our schedule for our upcoming budget and or budget university sessions we plan on running this year. The purpose of these workshops are to help our residents on understanding what goes into creating a school budget and the challenges that are faced in creating a sustainable spending plan. We did previously run this committee. It was called, in the past, Budget 101, and we ran it from about 2007 to 16, and we did decide on we did a hiatus for a few years, but I think there was a real value, and Valerie has worked in her previous district too about, it's really not a matter of how many people that show up, but there's a value in offering this to residents, so they really have a really good source of how we develop our school budgets. I think some of the topics we plan on covering are state aid, federal funding, as well as benefit costs and contractual obligations, and just kind of the tax cap and things like that. And we may be looking to even potentially bring in some guest speakers to help with some of these discussions around state aid. The 3 dates that we've chosen are November 25th, December 9th, and January 21st. We'll be sending out information in the next, I would hope by the end of this week, to alert the public to these sessions. And we talked about potentially starting them about 6:30 to kind of make it easier for parents and different people to be able to get out of work but not make it too late either. We really felt these dates will work out well because then it kind of flows right into our natural budget cycle, and then people will have the opportunity to kind of have that little bit of a workshop prior to us getting into our budget discussion, which will happen in late January.
Can I ask you a
Yes,
question?
sure.
I think that what would be great, and I don't want to put like more work on anyone's plate, but I just think from an awareness perspective, so 99% of the people in town won't show up because of the variety of reasons. And if we could get like a 2 or 3 page like cheat sheet of like the top 10 things you always wanted to know about a school budget but were afraid to ask, or something that's like a little bit you read on the cell phone sort of thing.
Okay.
Because I think that there's even people who get really plugged in about certain budget issues, when you as a board member, like we end up talking to them, you realize like they actually don't know what's going on or how these budgets are set, and they will probably never come to one of these meetings. And my biggest fear is that the market takes a turn, in February or something, and now we're stuck, and we're trying to scramble, catch up, and trying to explain, no, okay, these cuts have to happen for these, here's where we're cutting, here's we'll never solve all of it, but if we could just get something, I'm happy to chip in and help out to do something like that, 'cause I think it's important.
Right, and Maureen and I both had experience with, looking at infographics. That's a very important feature
Right.
to, taking information that's largely, quantitative and turning it into some representations that really help illustrate, certain, key principles, regardless of what happens if these things remain, are the same, in
Exactly.
terms of New York State, budgeting. And as Maureen said, they're really important is background information, because coming to the board meeting is not the place where you're going to learn, why it is that, that we have very little control, for example, over, certain parts of the budget and what we do have control over. So those things are going to be really important to hear in advance so that we can continuously, give people that background, and then when they do come to the board meetings, or if they don't, and all of this stuff will be on, all these resources will be online, they'll
Yes.
be available, there'll be Facebook live chat or Twitter live chat, so there are other mechanisms for people who may not be able to come to the meeting. They can access all the resources that'll be on our website, as well as, we'll send those out and make some, as I said, some shortcut tools.
Yes.
We both would, have some ideas about how to pull those together.
Yeah, we had talked about that because of the fact that, we would want to either do something that we could tape and then people can see it on Facebook or on our website. Because I think there is value to them, and I think people have participated in the past, I think find it gets them a lot more understanding of the challenges in creating our budget. Okay, so tonight we have our bond update, and our architects and construction managers will present an update to the board and the public on the design and infrastructure work at Hillside. We've been meeting frequently, and not only meeting here, but also the architects have been meeting outside of the district, and as we've reported out in the past, it's really critically important that we're trying to stay on that timeline for submission, because if we're unable to stay on that timeline, there will be a direct impact on our ability to start the work on the time frame we would like to, and also our ability to bid out the work and to receive what we believe is a better time to bid for pricing. What else did I want to say here? So being we're a school, we have a very short window of our ability to kind of start work or get some work done, especially with roofing. And it's really critical that we don't want to miss that first season, this first upcoming summer, in order to get both some of the work, infrastructure work done at Hillside, as well as mobilization of the addition at Hillside to get started. We'll be working, I'll be working in early spring with the financial advisor and the bond council on issuing a ban for the work that we'll be doing in the upcoming summer. And as we previously discussed, the idea would be to issue a ban to get us started and then roll over that into a bond, which will help us to kind of get the work started, but not lock us into that debt until the following year. And currently, the bond rates are still at 2%, and which is a good rate, being that the state has issued their bond amortization rate, which is 2.5%. And those are important because that's how we get refunded from the state. We don't want to borrow above that 2.5% threshold because we won't receive aid, anything above that borrowing.
Just explain what a ban is for people.
So a band is a bond anticipation note, and it's an instrument that allows you to do short-term borrowing. So if you don't need the entire amount of the $18 million that we are for the entire amount of work, and you don't want to borrow all that money and having to start making like large debt service payments back on that money, you can borrow a short-term instrument of a band, which then you can roll over and not have to start paying, like, they're only a year in time. So you're not accruing all that interest on that long-term borrowing. So you wouldn't want to borrow $18 million if you thought the first year you only needed to spend 4 or 5, because then you would be accruing interest on that large amount of money. So a band allows you the flexibility in just borrowing kind of what you need, and then being able, you can actually do it multiple times before you have to roll it over to a bond. And that also helps us align our debt payments to when we believe we'll receive our first state aid payment back on that work. So that's how districts typically do them, unless they think they have a need to have all their money, within the first few months, which would be unusual. So we're planning to do that, and we're confident that, our rates actually, the good news is the rates that are currently on for both bond and bands are not significantly, but lower than what we had anticipated when we planned for the referendum. We used about 3.5% to be very conservative. A little bit actually higher, like 3.7. So we're right on track to actually be much lower than that, which is good news for us as well. I just want to give you just a very short technology update. I've met with the network team. We've been meeting weekly. The district's migration to Windows 10 is complete. I think I may have been the last computer in the district to get the migration, so I'm pretty confident it's done now. The new image seems to have had all the kinks worked out at this point, and our team is in a good place in terms of our service desk and making sure that they're up to where BOCES sent some additional resources, because we were very behind with the migration of that work, as well as doing some other replacements we had going during the summer. One of the things that we talked about, and I'll be presenting probably like maybe during the financial meetings at one point, our technology spending for the next 5 years, because we have some fairly large infrastructure work. Our wireless is in its 7th year in the district. So some of these are big ticket items that we were able to fund years ago with different grants. And I was trying to get a handle on it, because in the next 2 years or so, we're going to have some significant technology purchases. So I think, in the next few weeks, I just want to start having some conversations around what that looks like, and planning out for some like closet upgrades, and the wireless infrastructure will have to be replaced at the latest in 22, 23. We also have Hillside coming online, and there'll be technology needs there. So we focused our time today on really planning what our technology spending will look like, at least for the next 3 years. We also have the one-to-one Chromebook replacement, which has been funded all through the Smart Schools money, and that money will be depleted by next year. So we have and we spend about $40,000 a year in giving those Chromebooks to our high school students. So all of these like larger, purchases, I wanted to really have a very good plan moving forward for the next 3 years as we have to address each of those. So I'll be bringing that to the board. But I wanted to start that before the budget process because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be addressed in the technology in the next 3 years. And that's about it. All my good news.
To respond to your question, we had 21 people volunteer. We had about 15 within the first 24 hours, and we had representation from all 3 buildings.
Okay, Sophia, what's going on?
So the past 2 weeks have been really busy. I know I say that every meeting, but every week at the high school is pretty busy. Let's see. The fall sports season is coming to an end. This is the last week of regular season games, and now a bunch of teams are moving on to sectionals, divisionals, states, which is really exciting. I know swim has our divisionals on Saturday. We're hoping to win. And our Hastings sector of Amnesty International has started working on what we're calling a charity fair, which is we're going to involve the whole community. People can come and present a charity or a cause they're interested in we're deciding between 30 seconds or a minute. And as many people that want can present a charity, and then at the end, people will have the opportunity to donate to all of those charities. We thought that this was a good way to raise awareness for different causes and to get the whole community involved in something school-related. The Environmental Club has also...
Where
yeah,
when is that? The Amnesty?
we're thinking January.
Okay.
We still have to talk to Mr. A and Buildings and Grounds about locations and dates, but we're thinking winter.
Okay.
The Environmental Club has also been really adamant this year about making some changes in the school. We've heard a lot about how the recycling may or may not happen, and a lot of that is due to contamination between garbage and paper, and how recycling can't happen if there's a mix between the different items. One of the ways to prevent that would be to get more of those garbage cans that have different shaped holes for different objects. For example, like a slit for paper, circles for cans. A few girls in the Environmental Club are talking about writing a grant proposal to the Green School. There's a Green School organization that will provide money to a school for those trash cans specifically. We're working on making some changes this year, which is exciting.
That's great.
I'm actually meeting with the Environmental Club next week about this grant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia.
Great. Okay. Public comment. So I'd like to ask if there's public comment to keep your comments at 3 minutes and state your resident in Hastings. Going once, going twice. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to pass the meeting over now to Janice Mateo Toledo, who will take us through a presentation. You've got slides, right? Okay.
Actually, Patrick will
Okay.
get that on. And there's some information that we'll be adding afterwards, so just to let you know that. There are a couple of slides where we just have to confirm some information.
Oh, great.
Everyone, good evening. So I'm here to talk tonight about the English as a New Language program and our work with diversity and inclusion. So I want to start us off with a little bit of research and understanding the second language acquisition process. So there are 6 stages of language proficiency. It's not totally linear because the kids can kind of go back and forth into them depending on the child and the need. But those are kind of the 6 stages. But the most important piece is understanding the difference between BICS and CALP. So BICS is the basic interpersonal communication skills, and that's the social language that kids use on the playground, talking to each other. And then there's the CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency. And that's the language of school, that's the academic piece. That's the piece that takes children 5 to 7 years to become completely fluent in a language. And that's why sometimes teachers may say, oh, the student speaks English really well. Why are they still in the ENL program? It's because they still haven't developed the CALP that's needed to be able to do the work in the classroom. And as any good ENL teacher would do, here is a visual of what that looks like. So the CALP is the top. And actually, many of our students come to us with the CALP already established. So we have to then continue to work. I mean, the BIC's already established, and what we're doing is we're working on the CALP piece. And it's a long process for children, and I think here in Hastings we do a great job of it, and I'll explain why. So some of our goals. The goal, of course, is always increasing the language comprehension of children, preparing direct, explicit instruction that develops the BICS and the CALP. For the most part, we work on the CALP. Supporting students in the classroom by creating scaffolds and supporting classroom teachers. We do co-teaching models as well, so that the teachers are in there providing support. And opportunities for experiential learning. Valerie's been talking a lot about using New York City as kind of a classroom. And one of the strategies for language learning is using children's background knowledge. So if you're talking about going to see a Broadway show and a child has never seen one, then it becomes a little bit more difficult for them to understand what it is that's happening, or if you've never been to a beach and you don't understand what the sand feels like. So we try to create opportunities for kids to have experiences that we could then later on use in the classroom. So one of the things we're planning on doing this year, we're in the hopes of doing, is taking the kids to see The Lightning Thief on Broadway. The tickets are on sale for $39, so we figured we'll probably use our ENL budget to pay for that. And the PTSA was kind enough to offer busing. So we're hoping to be able to do that for them and have a really great experience.
Great.
In terms of how we measure growth, so New York State makes every ENL student takes what's called the NYSESLAT, the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test. They have not, it should be ENL, but the state hasn't changed it. Anyway, the goal is to identify language proficiency. So if a student comes in, are they an entering student? Are they an emerging student? Transitioning, expanding, and commanding is the last level. So when a student reaches the commanding level, they are no longer considered an ENL student. They're considered a former ELL, but the state calls that a FLEP, F-L-E-P. In terms of, and also measuring growth also means that we want students to obviously move up a level or two. It also determines our level of services, and children receive services 2 years after reaching the commanding level. So we have to continue to provide those services to them.
Janice, excuse me, do you know how many students approximately take this test each year?
Every ENL, I would say we usually have between 20 and 18 students. So that's for the district-wide. These were our results, and we're really, really proud of them. In 2019, we had 22 students. Actually, I'm going to tell you, I was able to pull up some numbers for you. So at Hillside, we have approximately 7 to 8 students that took the NYSESLAT exam, and 2 of those students had IEPs. We had 1 student test out of the program for Hillside. That's great because they are obviously younger children and it takes time to test out, so that's a really great number for us. In the middle school, we have approximately 11 students who took the exam. 75% of those students have IEPs, which was a pretty large number. And we had a large number of long-term Ls, which New York State identifies as 7 or plus years in the program. So we were able to test out of our 7 long-term Ls, 6. And 1 of those students came in as a transfer student. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing in the program, testing our children out. Commanding level is 82% in the middle school, which is also a very high number. At Hastings High School, we had approximately 4 students take the exam. 1 of those students has an IEP, 1 is a long-term L. And in the high school, we have what's called SIFE. These are children who come to us with limited or interrupted education, whether it's because of war, whether it's because the level of education in their home school is not up to it's not up to the level of Hastings. So we'll get students who walk in to 11th grade and have a 4th grade reading level in their native language. So that becomes a whole nother process and a whole different way of teaching those students. So we have 100% passing rate, which again, all of my colleagues are jealous of us. So and why that happens is because, not just because we're fabulous teachers, but because we kind of, I think I had a really great conversation with Lou and Gail in the past, and we made it a point that any ENL teacher we hired had to be dual certified. That means that teacher has to have an ENL license as well as a classroom license, a literacy license, or a special ed license, so that those teachers are able to do the work that those children need, right? If they don't know how to read, we need a literacy teacher, a literacy specialist. So we have the ENL teachers also literacy trained, so we're able to do that work. So we're kind of double dipping. However, something interesting that happened, we were at a meeting and we were talking about us being a potential state target in the areas of math and ELA, in the areas of special education and economic disadvantage. And Valerie happens to say to me, Janice, can you take a look at this list and see if there are any kids that you recognize? And it turned out there are many numbers of our former ELLs or FLEPs. And it got us thinking. So we are doing a really great job of getting them out of the program. So now we have to kind of start thinking about what's the next step. So once they're out of the program, how do we kind of work with these students so that they continue to make progress? So something that I started thinking about is, what role does language or culture play for these students when it comes to learning? So something for us to think about, and New York State released their culturally responsive and sustaining educational framework, which is something I think is important for us to look at when we're educating these students, because culture does play a big role. Because at the end of the day, we're really looking at their CALP. That means that although the CALP is developed enough for the state, it's not truly developed enough as they're moving forward. So just something for us to start thinking about.
Can you just take us through that, just so I understand? So where, like, what is this list? Where do you get that list from?
The list of
You
students?
said you looked at the list of students and you saw, like, where is that?
So one of the things that we're doing from a space of data analysis is when we're thinking about a potential target status, we're able to drill down to specific demographic subgroups, and we're being really targeted in terms of our multi-tier system of supports to make sure that we know who the kids are, what we're going to do about it, what are we seeing very specifically in the skills, and where is there maybe intersectionality with something else. So in this case, even though under ESSA the state will, well, they'll follow children and they'll still consider them English language learners even at 2 years after. But in this case, that wasn't something that came up. So as kids are moving along in the system, it was a great wondering to be having. So we are working at the building level as professionals to get really nitty-gritty on who our kids are, so that we can be very specific in meeting them where they are.
And these are all in district, so it's not out of district.
That's right.
And so, just so I make sure I'm tracking, maybe a kid goes into elementary school, halfway through middle school, they're at a commanding level. By 9th grade, they're out of the program, and then you're checking in again in 11th grade or something of that nature, and you're saying there's some proficiency lacking, even 2 years after they've been at commanding level.
So it's similar. So we're thinking about if there's the potential target status at the middle school, who are our English language learners at the elementary school who may no longer qualify for services but are showing up on the radar as in a group of students that is more vulnerable that we need to be looking at. And then we're able to see what has their learning history been in the elementary school as they're moving through. Why are they no longer, in one group or another? And then thinking about that a little bit more holistically in terms of, well, what does that mean? So it is not, it just raises more questions in terms of being curious about where all of those connections are, so that we can make sure that while we're looking at things from an academic lens, we're also looking at things social emotionally, we're looking at things culturally, and we're getting a much more full landscape of what's going on for these learners.
The other shift has to do with, which Janice and the leadership teams have been talking about. ESSA also focused attention on these different levels of language proficiency that wasn't part of NCLB. So there's an expectation that students have to make a specified amount of progress between each of these levels. So at the same time that they're learning language, they also have to demonstrate progress. And that's something that, we all kind of, are responding to, because that is a change in a very significant way. And so that's part of the conversation, that all of us are having, that Janice, as I said, the building leadership teams, as well as Tesfa and Laura, because they are also involved. As you can see, some students can have dual services as an English language learner as well as a student with an IEP, and so we have to be that much more conscious. So I want to thank, Janice and the team, because actually Melissa and I attended one of the back-to-school E&L presentations, and there's a lot of great work that's gone into what they, have been doing, and they had quite a nice turnout. And how many different languages are represented in that group of parents that we saw?
10?
10. From Germany?
From Germany, France,
Poland?
Poland, Chinese, Mandarin,
Right.
Cantonese, Filipino, Spanish. I'm trying to think who else is in there.
But that's just to give you a sense
Ukrainian.
of the different learners, so they're not the same children
Italian.
from the same
Italian.
countries.
Hindi, Spanish,
So it's pretty diverse.
Check.
Check.
So again, if I, just so I'm tracking, it's 2 years out, they have a commanding, a command of the language. They're still struggling with learning, and so you're looking at these former English language learners for the role that culture might be playing in those challenges.
Or
and
language.
or still language in a very specific set of things.
Because remember the cognitive academic language proficiency model that Janice showed, where it takes 5 or more years for children to learn, language associated with domains or content that the rest of us take for granted. But they're also learning the language, the cultures.
So why would they be deemed commanding then?
Because at some point the state we have to let them go at some point.
They
So
pass the
so
test.
whatever the state decides
test.
is the mandate, then that's
So they're commanding, but not
not commanding.
Okay.
Right. They're commanding according to New York State.
That's right. Right, exactly.
They're
And on the
commanding on the
test.
test.
It's like passing
It doesn't
the
mean
test.
that,
On
yeah,
this
you don't
test,
really
right,
know
on the
anything
On
about
a
it.
test.
I want to I'm grateful to hear that you're talking about experiential learning in terms of language development, and this sort of ties back to the very brief earlier thinking I was talking about play, and there really is true evidence that like three-dimensional social experiential interplay between children and knowledgeable adults really does grow symbolic thinking, which is really at the root of all language development. So I really want to encourage that to be at the forefront, whether it's connected to culture, yes, but it's also just really connected to symbolic development and how children can navigate from their native language to English language.
Yeah, and another thing that it has been great is that this board has allowed us to provide services beyond the mandated minutes. That's huge, because we're able to do push-in and pull-outs for these students. So we're able to get them to do 2 years worth of growth, and that's a lot for an English language learner. So I want to thank all of you for that, because that makes a huge difference in their world and in their learning.
Just a follow-up, so the experiential learning and the other work that you would do, would that take place before the 2 years after testing out? Or would you bring them back into the fold to keep the learning going?
Well, we never let go of our kids. So So they may be out of the program, but that doesn't mean that we don't go back and check on them. Or for the most part, they come back to talk to us. So they're always in my classroom. Hey, Ms. McHale, how are you? You know, how's everything going? And I would never not invite a former L to attend a trip with us. And I don't see any of our 3 administrators saying that they wouldn't allow them to go. And to avoid any kind of issues with socioeconomics, we do pay for the trip. So that piece, you know, we just is taken care of.
And we expect to see these children also go for the Seal of Biliteracy.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
So the Seal of Biliteracy is a program that New York State started, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago. And it's really about children being proud of being bilingual. And the high school, actually, I think it's Nora Bertocchi is kind of the coordinator of the program. And the goal is for children to create, they have to get certain points. So they have to create some sort of written assignment in English, and then some sort of written assignment in their native language. And then they take a test. Anyway, they come up with a certain amount of points. And once they have those points, they are awarded this Seal of Biliteracy that goes on their diploma. And according to BOCES, they said there was a student, and there was a university that had 2 students who were kind of comparable in terms of who they were going to accept and who they weren't. And because the student had the Seal of Biliteracy on their diploma, they took that student. So it's something that New York State is kind of in. The other 50 states, some are doing it, some are not. But for the most part, I think it's a great opportunity for kids. And it doesn't just have to be English and Spanish, it could be any language.
Exactly.
So when our students come in, and if they speak fluent Portuguese, they can do that Seal of Biliteracy in Portuguese and English. They don't need to do it in the languages that are taught in the school.
And it's in recognition that, you know, being able to speak multiple languages is an asset.
Right.
And that's recognized globally, and that's a true, I think, indicator of, you know, recognizing, you know, creating a well-rounded, you know, young person who is, you know, globally minded and is able to go out into the world, you know, and do what most Americans can't do, speak multiple languages. Thank you, Janice.
So now we'll move on to the diversity and inclusion piece. So in 2018, 2019, I was presented with these goals. And just to review them a little bit, in terms of ensuring hiring practices, we had 17 new teachers hired, and 7 were for underrepresented groups. In terms of our incidents of bias protocol, that is complete, and it's going to live in the Code of Conduct and the Dignity for All Students Act. In terms of our continuing to implement multicultural literacy, we did that last year, and we're continuing to do that this year. And the last piece is appropriate learning opportunities for staff, parents, and students. We had Diane Goodman come in, and we worked on implicit bias. And of course, we're going to continue that this year as well. So where are we, and where are we going next? So next, I had a really great meeting with Valerie and Melissa. And we talked a lot about what are the next steps for the Diversity Committee. And we talked about we want to continue to be a resource for the community. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to focus on the work of diversity and the training. So in order for us to create what I thought was a brilliantly labeled, was an adult toolkit. Because at this point, we're going to reach a point where our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students are going to have had more racial literacy than their teachers. And they're going to start having conversations in classrooms that our teachers need to become comfortable with as well. So in order to do that, this committee is going to come together, and we're going to do some trainings through book study. The first book we're going to read is White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, and kind of have discussions around that. We're going to talk about the archaeology of the self, talking about identity and why we believe the things we believe. We're going to talk about and discuss hard history. We're going to continue with our idea of using case studies, whether they're case studies where people want to bring forward that they experienced, or case studies that we read in the newspapers that we want to talk about as a committee. We're going to continue using workshops and attending conferences and all of that, and we're hoping that this will be a 2 or 3 year kind of process to have an adult toolkit for the adults in our community. So that's kind of where we're going at this point. And we have created partnerships, and one of our partnerships is with Facing History and Ourselves. So we had 2 middle school teachers apply for an in-depth grant, and we received it. So 2 of our teachers, and one is here today, Gina, and June, one attended the Immigration in a Changing World program, and the other one attended the Reconstruction era. So they attended those programs in the summer, and the expectation is that they will implement this curriculum into the classroom. And along with that, they will receive a year-long consultation with Karen Schur, which is our partner in Facing History. They're going to receive literacy guides and digital learning library, access to digital learning libraries, and they're going to receive professional development at no cost. So it's a really great opportunity. So Gina's here tonight just to talk a little bit about her experience.
Hello, everyone. So I was lucky enough this summer to attend the Reconstruction era and the fragility of democracy. It was a 3-day professional development that was incredibly eye-opening for myself and now for my students. It was more than just learning how to teach the Reconstruction era, which is a very hard time period of our history to teach our young children. And it was really a lot of identity work for the adults who were there, and then we brought that back to our students. I am fortunate enough to teach with a wonderful co-teacher who allowed me to turnkey the information to him, and then we did a unit with our children, and we are continuing, even though we have moved past the Reconstruction era, we are continuing using a lot of the identity work to learn about different events and eras in history and how our identity and our past shapes our perspective and our viewpoint of current events and history that we're learning about.
What grade do you teach?
So I teach middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th. I'm a special education teacher, but I also co-teach 2 of our 8th grade social studies, American history classes. Not only was this about identity work and about the Reconstruction era, but my professional development was also partnered with the New Visions for Public Schools. And so many of the items that they gave us to use with the children are differentiated, so all learners can do this. They have very many entry points, so it is inclusive both in whatever your background and your culture are, and also your learning style.
That's great.
It was a wonderful 3 days. I was sad that it was only 3 days. I'm going to go back for more.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second partnership is with Teachers College. So I know many of you have met Deetra already. She presented to our board. So she's going to come back to continue some racial literacy work with Hillside teachers K through 4. And in exchange, she has an opportunity for Hillside teachers. So she's going to be offering a social justice for children's literature and media forum on January 25th and March 7th. And she is inviting our teachers to come at no cost. So that's a great opportunity for us. We'll talk to her, twist her arm a little bit. Our Multicultural Book Fair and Festival, our dates are May 27th, 28th, and 29th. The festival will be on the 30th. I don't have to say much because I know we've done this a few times now. In terms of Courageous Conversations, we have now completed the 8th grade curriculum. So our 6th grade is more of an introduction of racial literacy. Our 7th grade is kind of digging a little deeper into racial literacy, and our 8th grade curriculum is more of an action year. I can't tell you what exactly that's going to look like yet because it's happening right now. But as soon as we have something to show you, then we will I'll definitely bring it back. And we are continuing our multicultural book club at the Farragut Middle School, 7th and 8th graders. We're reading Amal Bound. I haven't gotten the book yet, but it's on its way, so we're going to be starting up soon. And something new at our high school, we have an affinity group that started, and this came directly from the students. So I have our students here who are going to talk about the affinity group.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Hi.
I've given this spiel to, I'm Avanti Chen. I was working on the buzzer last year, the race issue of the buzzer that came out kind of in April or May. And working on that, interviewing students of color about their experience at Hastings, I kind of started picking up on this whole community of students of color that had opinions about race at our schools and didn't really feel like they had a space to share them or felt comfortable enough to share them. So meeting all these people, I thought it would be really beneficial to the whole community if we were able to bring them all together and talk openly about race and racism, as well as work cooperatively to maybe come up with solutions or school programs that can get people more comfortable with talking about race in our school.
Yeah, so basically this affinity group is basically a safe haven for students of color, and it's a good way for us to come together and relate to some of the issues, if there are issues, or talk about things that are going great and just to share whatever's going on. And it's like sometimes you won't be able, it's certain times where you connect with people of the same race as you or not as the same race as you, like people of color. It's easier to connect with them with certain issues. So it's a good thing that we have this, and as a person that's a part of the affinity group, it has helped out 100%, and I feel like I have a safe haven there and I could just talk about anything. Like, I feel like before the affinity group, I wouldn't have been able to share some of the experiences with some of my other peers that aren't students of color, and I'm happy that I could share with them now.
So the hope for the group is that having this kind of private space will help bring some of these issues into like a more public setting, and maybe do some like more school-wide programs centered around race that come from like student experiences and student ideas. Yeah.
How
Thank you.
often do you guys get together?
Well, we've had like 1.5 meetings so far.
Yeah. Most of us have like this week.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're meeting Thursday.
Especially since we had sports and like people are a part
Yeah.
of different groups and clubs, it's hard, but now that winter is coming around, it's easier and more time.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do like bi-weekly meetings. They happen in the evenings. We thought that having the meetings kind of like more quiet and private school setting would be more beneficial. They're like an hour and a half long. Yeah, bi-weekly, maybe monthly.
Have you reached out to any of your peers, sort of the age and grade level peers at other schools that have had these affinity groups for a much longer time, to get an idea of what they've done with their groups, the types of resources they have in their groups, the types of resources that they bring in to the school, to the students in the groups?
Yeah, so I haven't reached out to students specifically in other districts, but I definitely I emailed Dr. Dennis, and I've spoken on the phone with a couple of people who run racial affinity groups as like their primary job, and yeah, and I've been advised by Ms. Mateo, and I welcome any other counsel available since we're both new to this, but
That would be my only suggestion, which is I think the private schools, it hasn't tended to exist in public schools for lots of different reasons. But the private schools, these things have existed for a long time because the private schools, the minority population of the private schools tend to be even smaller than here. So if you would reach out to any of the girls' schools or boys' schools and get a sense for what type of programming and what type of resources have been useful to you, my guess is you'd probably get, of course I'm looking back a number of decades, but if things haven't changed all that much, which maybe they haven't, maybe they haven't, but I think you may get some really useful ideas in terms of, because it's not just about affinity amongst yourselves, but then it's about getting resources and opportunities
absolutely.
that are targeted.
That'd be awesome. I will come talk to you about that later.
We're also trying to make sure, like, trying to reach out to those students that usually wouldn't participate in things like this, because I have friends that are also students of color, and they're so used to everything in Hastings since they live here majority of it, like most of the time, that we're trying to reach out and say, hey, like, even though you like usually don't talk to these, like, this group of people, like, come and join and just like have a laugh, share stories, and it's just fun. You know?
Yeah, I think that the most difficult part of it is the people that we want to reach the most are the ones that are most resistant to having difficult conversations. So we're hoping that it becomes more of a norm that students of color are joining this group, but obviously finding ways to incentivize joining, or just making sure people know that it's out there. Having maybe like teachers talk about it in their classrooms, just as like a, hey, this exists, you should think about joining if you're a student of color, would be really helpful, because attendance is, low, but we're hoping we're getting there.
I have one related suggestion to Tim's too, because I worked in public and in private schools, and the private schools that I have worked at have had a history of affinity groups, and I worked in elementary side of private school, and it was very common in those cultures for the affinity groups in the elementary school to be family affinity groups. So families would have an affinity group where they'd have like a potluck once a month or something like that, and it would feed into, by high school, then the kids would be meeting on their own, obviously without their parents, and having groups and other activities. So as it potentially grows here in Hastings, that's another way to get just that culture of joining that group starting at a younger age.
Yeah, for sure. I briefly mentioned this to someone. We're hoping that it kind of extends to the lower schools, like later on, so that it's just like by the time you're at high school, it's like a very normal part of school culture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have for you tonight.
So I just want to thank you, because I feel like we're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And that's not so easy to do. And I also want to say that I've been in I guess a journal club is what it was really, but at where I work, and we did read White Fragility. And it was done in a variety of ways. It was done with a group of people who were all white, all non-white. It was done with a mixed group. And I guess the only thing, I know a lot of people have already read it, and I think some people on the board I gave copies to. But little doses at a time, because there's so much to digest, and it's so important. I mean, like small, not like read the whole book and come and talk about it, but we would do chapter or a few chapters at a time. Yeah.
We actually, one member of our committee actually facilitated this discussion at the library and has kind of a guide that she's going to, I'm sure she's going to use to help us out, Karen.
Oh, okay.
So that would be helpful. And as you said, the others
Sure.
have been reading it. My superintendent's group is also reading it. We have our first discussion on November 4th.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise.
Okay, Maureen, do you want to introduce? I'm
Yes.
not sure what order we want to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the administrators, do you need to stay for anything else?
Oh.
They were here to support Janice. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, ladies. Sophia?
I'm curious about this.
Night, everybody.
Okay, so with us tonight to provide an update is both our architects, PBDW as well as H2M, as well as our construction managers, Triton. And what we're going to have, basically the presentation tonight is to update you. We now have some cost estimating that Triton has performed based on the designs that have been shared with you at a previous meeting about the addition to Hillside and the infrastructure work at Hillside. So tonight we'll be discussing what some of where those price estimating ended up. And again, Kevin will speak to you about how they're done at different points in time and where we see some of the changes in what we originally had budgeted to where we are now, and just give you a kind of a overview of the work that they've been doing, working with our architects. And then we'll get back into the designs and some options that could happen, and then just kind of a summary of where we are in terms of timeline and just the overall budget itself. So Kevin from Triton, who is our main construction manager on the project, will begin with the presentation tonight.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I also have Matt Johns with me, who's also working with us in Triton Construction. We are going to hopefully have a quick conversation about a little bit about where we've been up till now, and then talk again about where we're going from here. So we hope to give you a good status update in regards to some recent activities. And then talk a little bit more about schedule and things that we need to do in order to get the process completed through SED and out to bid in a reasonable schedule so that we could do certain amounts of the work over the summer, as well as maintain the overall construction schedule that the board had committed to at the time that they went out to vote. So we're going to talk, I just put a little agenda together. What I'd like to discuss myself is a little pre-bond budget versus schematic design costs and some of the factors associated and affecting the costs. Then I'm going to turn it over to PBDW, Ray and Raina, who are going to give you an update on the current design. Then H2M is going to talk about the interior existing building renovations and alterations. Then I'll come back and kind of tie all the parts together with some costs associated with them. And then we'll talk a little bit about financing and that aspect of it. So, first, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the process, what we've been doing up until now to make sure that you guys are up to speed. So, you guys, there are 4 basic time periods in the design process. The first one is what we call a conceptual design process, which happens pre-bond. So that's already happened, right? A conceptual design at the time of the vote is pretty simple. Has to be, right? There's not a lot of funding, and we recognize that this, from that period, you still have a long time to go before you can actually go into construction. So the numbers that were put together at the time were not done by Triton. We weren't obviously involved at that time. However, we are involved moving forward with all the other what we're calling cost options, opinions or estimates moving forward. So There's three basic estimates through the design period that we're involved with. One is called SDs, or schematic designs, which is approximately 33% of design completion, if you think about it as long as in a ladder. The next step is design drawings, or DDs. That's about 66% of design completion. By that time, instead of seeing colored boxes, you start seeing actual physical drawings of rooms and bathrooms and things. You've seen some of the very advanced drawings in previous board meetings that were done by PBDW. And then we'll talk about contract documents, which is 99%. And basically, that's prior to submission to SED. At each one of these time periods, we like to do a presentation to the board to make sure that you are fully aware of how we're tracking, not just the design, but also the costs associated with the design. And so we want to talk to you a little bit tonight about our first cost opinion. So we tried to start an estimate on the drawings that were provided for the hillside additions and interior alterations of hillside home. We're not talking tonight at all about the high school, middle school. That's coming up in some future meetings. So in short, pre-bond direct construction costs, just construction only, for the new addition was approximately $7.2 million. And then the interior alterations were approximately $1.5 million. That was what was projected in the original bond that was voted on. The current cost opinion through schematic design for the new addition is about $9.7 million, and the interior alterations at approximately 2.4. All right, and there are obviously a lot of factors that go into this estimate. So I want to talk a little bit about what those factors are that are influencing the slight increase in the cost. And then I'd like to talk about, and then obviously we want to continue that conversation about whether or not the board wants to address any of these individual items, or as a whole, or as a part, or not. And there are obviously options to any decision that the board makes. So some of the factors that were driving the high school, addition at Hillside was the original design was much more simplistic in nature than what is currently developed. Now, eventually the design always gets further developed. And obviously the idea is to make sure that the scope of the work that you do maximizes your bond, right? You want to spend up to it, but you can't spend over it. So the designs are constantly going through changes all the time to maximize as much of the scope within the dollar value that you have, right up to it. All right. Sometimes during the process it goes over, so we have to bring it back in. So we have multiple conversations with the school district in reference to that, with the individual architects in reference to that. They're going to be talking about some of those things tonight, so that make sure that we continue to maintain the budget that we promised the community that we would stay within. Some of the items that we recognize were not clearly defined in the original bond scope was the telescopic seating inside the auditorium there, seats that push out inside the cafeteria auditorium. Some site work on the outside as well as the portico on the outside. There's some bathroom enlargements that was clearly a good idea. But there's costs associated with it that obviously impact your overall budget. The cellar storage room, which was not an original concept, but it was really a great idea. And in actuality now, with some of the design changes, you need some of that space for mechanical services anyway. So portions of that you're going to need to have. Classroom size increased slightly. I'm talking 15, 18 square foot a classroom. 90 to 100 square foot in total, not a lot, but when you talk about, the dollar values associated with building classroom space, it has a significant number. And of course, material costs over time, as well as various tariffs and things like that. So we have seen in the market a significant increase in things like structural steel and metal products like ductwork and light fixtures, things that are made of thinly formed metal. So we try and anticipate and incorporate what we believe those prices are going to be at the time that we bid. And obviously that's still a ways off, right? So as we go through the process of these various SD, DD, and CD estimates, we're going to get closer to the bid date. We keep adjusting the numbers to fit the time and what we feel is the the material costs and tariff costs and things like that, escalation, which is also included in here. And that's for the new addition. The factors influencing the interior renovations are the flooring replacement, which also does include a hazardous material abatement, some window and storefront replacement, and also one item that I don't have up here is some of the exterior masonry repairs and replacements on the outside. We had in the original bond, a dollar amount for that. We've obviously, now that your engineers and your architects have done a full analysis of what's needed, they recognize, well, you need a few more windows, you need a few more storefronts, you need more exterior wall work done. They've identified it in the scope. We've priced it out, and now we recognize that it's slightly over your projected budget. So we're going to need to talk about bringing a little bit of that back to stay within our budget. Okay. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ray and Raina and let them go through their design. Thank you.
This is a quick question before you, and we don't have to get into a detailed discussion of this, but I'm no math whiz, but this looks like almost a 50% increase in cost between pre-bond and SD. I mean, I realize this isn't a final number, but that seems like more than just a little bit of an uptick. Is that?
So, great question. Schematic design is a difficult time for boards because oftentimes the architects are shooting for the stars. They got a lot of input from the administrators, from their user groups, their committees, to try and get certain projects done within the bond that may not have been necessarily been thought thoroughly through at the time of the bond. So it's not surprising at all to me that we have these types of numbers. And I oftentimes, in nearly every school district, find we're going through the same process of just ratcheting back a little bit, getting focused on where we like to be in terms of the overall costs. If we're within 5 or 7% over or under of the budget, at SDs, I'm fine. I can tell you with confidence that we'll find a way to make the rest of it work through various other ways, perhaps bid strategies or modifying the scope in some way, or perhaps modifying the general conditions cost of logistics, or the things that we have to put in place to physically build the building, rethink those things too. So I'm not overly concerned about where we are financially at this point. If we're still talking about 10 or more % past DD stage, design development stage, then we got to talk about ratcheting back what I'm going to use as a term, value engineering. All right. We're not at that stage yet. We do have some things here that we want to talk to you about in terms of why we feel it's pricing over what the initial budget was, and we want to get a feel from you guys tonight what your thoughts are on what you want to bring back. Okay.
And Kevin,
So
you also
this is
said this is a very, you use very conservative numbers, meaning they're going to, they're typically higher at this point because you don't know what's going to be. And then we can break into the budget later, but I think it is important for Ray to go through it. And then we're going to talk about different options. Yeah.
Sure we were all on, okay, same page.
As we get farther along in the process, if I sense that we're having difficulty getting us back to the numbers, I'm going to bring that to you. all right, and you'll know. Right now, I'm suggesting to the board not to panic, that we have some time before we need to do that.
I mean, my big concern, and you all do this more often than me, is that we get a lot of pretty pictures out there with a lot of big dialogues, and it starts getting a life of its own in the community prematurely, and I just want to avoid, that. And if you're all not concerned about that, I'm okay, but I just want to say, like, it's hard to put that toothpaste back in the tube if you've gotten people really fired up about different elements that we go, that was really interesting conversation at a board meeting, however, we're not getting that.
Sure.
And I don't think any of you are doing that, and I don't think that's where we are, but I just want to make sure that we're managing that. That's
Well, I'd like to turn it over to the architects, who I think might be able to better explain than I can where we are with the overall design. I think you'll find that it's still well intact.
Hi, thank you very much. We were shooting for the stars, and I'll tell you why. We were shooting for the stars in that we wanted to deliver exactly what you wanted to achieve with this building. We listened very carefully during the programming phase, which was not part of the concept design phase, which was the phase where we listened to the educators and the administrators very carefully in terms of what the expectations were for this building. And we believe that we have refined this to the point where it is not an it's not an overstatement of what this building should be. It's a reflection of what we have heard from you and how to make the best piece of architecture, most inviting piece of architecture that we can. We always shoot for the stars, and we understand budgets, and we don't like to go over them, but we try to listen very carefully and to make sure we're delivering what is expected, both visually and programmatically. So the changes from the concept design to where we are right now are a direct reflection of programming that didn't take place in the concept design phase for perfectly good reasons it didn't. Now that said, what you're seeing up here is this from the schematic design phase. It's changed very little. We are now within 2 weeks of delivering design development documentation, and it's very much like this building. A little simplified, but what you're seeing in front of you is pretty much where we are right now. We have worked now with lighting consultants and acoustical designers, and our original assumptions about acoustics and lighting were good. We hope that these spaces will look very much like this at the end of the day. They're economical solutions for lighting and for acoustics. Here you see the seating extended. We now know that this seating is going to accommodate 540 people, which was asked for about, and that in the cafeteria configuration was 320, which is right on target. The diagram that you're looking at here is from the schematic design phase. All of the elements are here, the new classrooms at the first floor. This is the cafeteria seating arrangement that you see here. And then if I can use this thing correctly, this one. Up here you see the configuration of this is the design development configuration. Now, the bathrooms were in this location. We shifted them over in order to get bigger music rehearsal spaces and resource rooms. So that's the biggest change from our schematic design. And the result is without a gross increase of floor area, we're able to deliver a better, tighter configuration of spaces back here. Also, you'll remember that we cut the stage down. Oops, sorry. Oops. That the stage is no longer a raised stage, but a flat stage, and that lets it duplicate as cafeteria space and space for the auditorium and stuff. It's flat floor, not raised. This now is the configuration, the full configuration with seating, which now we can have additional seating at the stage area, which will increase seating a little bit. And here's the configuration with the extended stage. This gives us a nice big stage that pushes out over the proscenium, which we can do because it's flat floored at this point. So it's a very efficient, compact way to address a multi-purpose space. The kitchen area is now reduced to the point where the kitchen consultant believes that we have the right amount of space for cooking and serving. We have, again, storage spaces for tables, and this bank here is for the retractable seating. So these were not originally programmatic components. Then, by virtue of the change of grade, which you know it's really steep back there, these classroom spaces were always part of the mix, but because of the change of grade, this space virtually is, if you didn't use it, it would just simply be open space below the building because you have to frame it out. So it's easy to accomplish this space. It was not in the program per se, but we did need mechanical spaces which were in the program. So this is the original bond drawing, and it shows, conceptually what was supposed to happen. With the classrooms, with the classrooms up above in here, specialty classrooms and junior classrooms, and then classrooms at the lower level, a big auditorium cafeteria space with a raised stage. This then is where we are and currently, and the red areas that you see are the overage areas, the square footage overage areas. So this is the overage area down below. This is storage down below at the lower level, which is the floor of this is just about equal to the grade outside the building. Mechanical spaces which are needed, obviously, because we have new boilers and things like that need to happen in there. And then the red areas are areas that were not, that we needed programmatically to make the building work. The bank over here is for the seating to retract into, chair storage, circulation space out front, and then a slightly extended entry. So the overall overage is about 2,700 feet. That's shown right there. So the overall square footage is about 2,700 feet over. So this is what we could do to bring this back. This won't save all of it. Oh, sorry. And this won't save all of the area, but if we eliminated the space below grade, if we eliminated the storage areas and the mechanical area, put the mechanical area in the classroom space is dropped in square footage, but we could do it. We could continue to squeeze the kitchen area by taking area here, and we could push forward a little bit here, which would push everything farther towards the stage, and finally we could reduce the area at the front of the building a little bit. So this would save a total of about 1,900 square feet, which is this thing right here. So that would bring this down close to where the bond was, but it's a rather draconian approach to architecture, meaning that these spaces are really needed. So we could do this if you desired us to push it in this direction, but we don't think it's advisable understanding the real needs of this. Taking these spaces out would still let you hit the same target numbers for seating in the auditorium, seating in the cafeteria, but it would be very tight. And I think this would be a real loss because this space is there in the air anyway. We might as well take it. So these are not things that I think you should give up lightly. And that's the end of kind of the status of where we are. So we're looking for direction here. We believe that the design that you see here is it's extremely compact and it's extremely functional. And we just hope that in pricing this and looking for some value engineering ideas, we can bring this back. Probably not to where it was ultimately, because that was not an adequate number in square footage or in pricing, but close to it.
So I guess I would just let H2M go, and then, because then we're going to come back to kind of, they just have a few slides on the infrastructure work, and then it'll just be quick, and then we'll get to talk about, what you've seen so far.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Danis with H2M. So for the infrastructure project at Hillside, there are 4 items that we focused on. One would be replacing the roof. So it would be replacing the roof, replacing select windows, replacing select flooring, and also repairing and repointing some of the exterior brick veneer. When we were looking at the cost opinion, we came up with a way to prioritize this work and present it to you tonight. So if you're looking at this floor plan here, there's 2 classrooms in the lower level. All the classrooms and the corridors have vinyl asbestos tile. So part of the idea is you want to try to abate that, get as much as you can out of the school with the bond. So the priority would be the hallway, the corridors there. They're in rough condition, they get most of the wear. The classrooms are in better condition. A lot of them are covered with an area rug and they're protected, and less of a concern. The other part of the scope of work would be the windows that are highlighted in orange in the section of the school to the right, in the top right corner. There's 3 windows along the main office, and then windows along the top that go by the library, windows around the edge where I believe it's the
Nurse's office. Nurse's office, yeah.
Those all are within the budget that came back to us. During this process, Joe Monterana had done the conference room down the bottom of the, down here. And he said that window is in horrible condition, much worse than the window that's located here that we were originally planning on replacing. So we're recommending as putting both these windows as an alternate in the package that goes out for bid. And then when we receive the bids, you'll know the cost to replace each of those, and you'll be able to make a decision on which way you would like to go. The windows that are in the classrooms here, along here and along this wall, they're operable windows, they're drafty, they're hard to operate. The set of storefronts right here, they're all fixed windows, less of an issue. The windows down here, Joe can't even get them to open. So those are, the priority is to get these here and then try to get that one. Also, part of the scope of work is repairing and repointing the exterior brick veneer. We went around and we were very nitpicky with what needed to happen. The priority would be to address the needs, the cracked areas, the missing bricks, deteriorating concrete, and focus on those, and a lot of the other things aren't as much of a concern, so we can reduce the scope on that as well. Along with the roofs are our priorities, so, and those fell right within our estimate in replacing those 3 roofs.
I think that's it for you, yeah. So yeah, that's basically the infrastructure work that'll be going to be submitted this year for the summer, and I think they just walked you through where some of the initial scope we had to pull back, and we'll speak about it a little bit more. So we had hoped to do some more flooring, but now with the cost estimates, we're now identifying the floors that will be prioritized, and then reducing the scope of work in those areas, because I think also as we talked today about the Hillside addition, we know that if there's any additional funds in the overall proceeds of the bond where we can kind of tighten up some other scopes of work to help offset some of the costs, the scope increases in the addition. Obviously not just that, just there'll be, I'm going to go through where we can find some savings to address some of the cost overages, but they were just showing that for the package going up for the work to happen in the summer, we've already brought that back to budget. That'll be submitted, roofing, flooring, repointing, and windows. We feel confident that, we're addressing the highest priorities at Hillside for those packages within budget. So I guess now we're going to go back to the timeline, Kevin, and then we'll summarize what we saw tonight. Oh, the additions, okay.
Yeah, so what does this all mean, right? We tried to put some dollars associated with the various areas that we had mentioned earlier, so that you can kind of get a sense of costs. All right. So what you see there for the new addition, the basic design versus the cost estimates versus the new design. Now, I do want to make one mention that this particular estimate is based on this scope. Oh, oops, not that one. That one. Because that is the design that you guys saw in the last board meeting or so.
No, that's not the design. It was the original design, Kevin. It's the next one that they saw.
No. Yeah, I think he's right.
It's only showing black and white, but it's very similar.
So some of
Oh, with the overages, yeah, sorry.
Some of the square foot numbers have changed based on this design.
Right.
And so I have not taken this particular one into account.
No. Oh, of course not, right.
It's more still
the original
more
one.
Conservative number. So we anticipate that as we move on with these discussions and we tweak these designs, that we're going to see these costs continue to decrease, the overages continue to decrease. Okay? I just wanted to make that clear. Nope. There it is. Okay.
There you go.
Again, in our original cost estimate at SDs, and obviously, Ray had said that he's far along in DDs now. We had anticipated the expandable seating cost about $500,000. However, the architects told me tonight that they are looking at other types of seating that are considerably less in cost, but still maintaining your same counts. So again, that number we're hoping to see decrease your overage. Okay. Site work in Portico. That's a little bit of the tweaking that was done on the drawings, the bathroom enlargement, cellar storage. You need the cellar storage for the mechanicals. The architects mentioned tonight that it kind of makes sense, and it does. So the numbers for the cellar storage is not included in that overall design, cost for the overall design, because at the end of the day, you're going to need it. So I didn't include it. And then you have the classroom size increases, which are minimal, and then some of the tariff impacts, as well as the flooring in the existing building, the window and storefront replacement, and the exterior wall repairs. Those are all savings costs that we can, I think, realize once we make some adjustments in what it is that we're going to need to do versus what we'd like to do. And that overall brings you very close back to your original budget. There's still a difference of about $300,000 on the new addition and about $500,000 on the existing building. Okay. I think that's, moving forward, I think that's reachable. But I wanted to make sure that you guys had all this information.
Just so I'm clear, if you add up everything on there, it's 2.4 million, thereabouts. So just help me understand the 800,000 versus the 2.4 million. I'm just not following how you.
Sure. So the 2.4 is the estimate, and we had. Let's see if I can find that slide. Oh, there it is. Okay, so pre-bond was 7.2. The estimate, the cost opinion right now, 9.7. That leaves about 2.5 difference, more or less, right? In the list of items and costs that we had in the previous slide was about 2.1 million. So that leaves about $3-4 million on that particular difference. On the interior alterations, it's 1.4 versus 2.4, so a little less than $1 million. We reclaimed about, I think it was about 4 million, that left us 6, remaining net difference. So the total overage right now is about $1 million. And of course, there's other things within the budgets that I could add to this, but these are the bigger things. And that's why I'm not overly concerned about us being able to bring that back. The new addition, the alterations, though, we are going to have to look very hard at all the classrooms and what we can really accomplish to meet our goals. I don't think we're going to get as much done as we had previously wanted to do. But I think it's within what the board has committed to the community. Okay.
So Kevin, if you want to go to the timeline, and then we'll get back to the budget at the end. So I think that's the next.
Okay. So, the important next steps. We have to get past the design development phase, turn the design over to H2M to fully develop the construction documents so that we can release to SED the week of March 2nd, basically beginning of March. Okay. Do I think we can do a little bit better? We're going to try like heck to do a little bit better than that timeline. Okay? And I think there may be some time in there that we can. Bidding, if all goes well with a, right now, XED is running about 8 to 10 weeks. So that's approximately the same time as the expedited review. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to watch the queues very carefully up at SED. If we see them tracking more, to 14, 16, 18 weeks, we may go back to the board and say, and the administration, and recommend a expedited review, which will take about 8 to 10 weeks or so, 12 weeks tops. It's been very successful. There is a fee involved with that, but I do believe we incorporated that into the original bond numbers. So if we can save the money, it's more money to put back into the kitty for other things. But if we don't, it's there to use to expedite the review. Obviously, that's so that we can get the bids and awards for 5/18. It's about a 7-week bid period plus a little time for the board to make their final approvals, so that we can start construction the first week of July. Because we most likely will have some form of rock removal in that area, and we want to do that over the summer, not during the school year. So it's imperative that we stick to that timeline. Okay? Hillside is running a little bit faster. The interior infrastructure work is running a little faster. SED the week of 11/11, back for bidding January 6th, and then construction for summer 2020. And we need to expedite that a little sooner to make sure that we have, because some of the materials associated with that is long lead. So you want to make sure we have plenty of time to fabricate the materials we need to do that work over the summer. So you may ask, well, you know, bidding 5/18 is kind of late, and it's not the best ideal bidding time, for sure. So it's really imperative that we stick on our schedule, because if we go beyond that date, we start to see accelerated costs by contractors. We see less contractors bidding on your projects.
But wouldn't those accelerated costs be earlier in the spring? I mean, the acceleration, I imagine, I've never done this before, but I'm just assuming they want their business.
I mean, the only thing, yeah, I mean, I would agree, and obviously the earlier the better, and Kevin obviously can speak to that. That's just always the thought. But the one thing with the Hillside project, especially the addition, I know Kevin, and they're out there talking about, this is a big chunk of work, and I think it'll be attractive to people. Kevin, do you think, in terms of, because that's going to be a project that even though we need them mobilized, they're going to have work for like 14 months. So it is attractive.
What's great about that project is it's a long-term project. It's over 12 months.
14 months, yeah.
You know, a lot of times the contractors are only getting projects that are just over the summer. And that is, you know, it's a really tightened down schedule. There's usually a ton of work associated with it all over the place. So they will definitely, this is definitely an attractive project, because it doesn't have to, it has to start over the summer.
But it doesn't have to finish, right.
Over the summer. It keeps going. So, but my concern is that the longer you push the schedule out, you start to affect the back end.
Oh, yeah,
right?
definitely.
So we want to be able to finish this for September school opening in 2021. So we don't want to push the timeline, is what we're saying, because there's cost effects associated with that. It's not that you couldn't handle it if it happened, just there's costs associated with it that we want to try and control.
But even like Kevin said, I think our main concern also with that project was the fact of the rock removal and the mobilization that has to happen in the summer. Once that happens, they can work throughout the school year. That work absolutely has to occur next summer, or else that's just in terms of getting the project started, it's going to be problematic. And that's why the timeline is really imperative.
So what occurs if it's 6/18 and we can't start? Do we push out?
Well, I think it has to, I think the idea is, well, I mean, the mobilization, that was always a concern.
The mobilization and the rock removal is paramount to do over the summer. If it ends up being 6/1, you probably could still get it all done within the summertime and it'd be okay. So I'm giving you a 2-week buffer.
Oh, okay,
but beyond that, we don't really have the time. I don't want to take the chance. If in fact it does end up being later than that, because there's a lot of balls up in the air, so who knows what happens, right? There are options. You could try and do the work during the school year. It's an option. I don't know if it's a good option.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty problematic.
The other option of extending it so that it happens a year later, it's an option. There's costs involved in an option. You're going to have escalation costs for that project being a year later than that.
There's a lot of issues with that, even in terms of money, borrowing, getting the reimbursement from the state. There's a lot of the aid, like Kevin said, escalation. I mean, you're going to pay 4% more for that project, if not more, just waiting a year to get it started. And there's a lot of reasons it has to be done. But I think, you know, we can go to the next slide where we start talking about addressing some of the numbers that that were shared with you tonight. So this is just very simplistic, but I'm going to speak to some of the numbers, and we've had a time to digest. And again, this is not every project I ever worked on. This is not surprising. Once you're pre-bond to where you end up, those numbers do change once you get into a full design phase of any project. It happened at the field. I think people, when you're away, you just know that everything that you thought more or less was going to be delivered in the bond was delivered, and the main project last time was the field. So as we look at Hillside Elementary School, I mean, this is just some thoughts about how, and we've had an opportunity to meet with, although the numbers have gotten a little bit higher during the course of this week, I think I shared with the board, I mean, the design from the beginning was a larger footprint. I mean, you're not going to add 3,000 square feet to a building that was priced at $450 a square foot pre-bond without, contingency and escalation, and think that it's not, we knew that we were looking at approximately $1 million just on size alone in that design. But, what we did the last bond, which has served the district well, when we went and borrowed the money for the bond, we intentionally, part of not using any of the capital reserve during that time was similar to what we had done with the previous bond. We held it back because then when you get into situations during the full design, you have a really better understanding of what your costs may be. You can, the board can ask the community through the bond, the budget process to allow for us to use what is sitting in the capital reserve to help offset some of the escalation of the costs as we see. I mean, as Kevin shared tonight, just alone the seating, the actual seats themselves are over $500,000, let alone the 500 square feet that they have to reside in a bank to be. I mean, if you do that number, and I actually think this addition was priced at $490 a square foot, just those two factors alone, you can see where right away, that would be a significant amount of money. And that would be something that would be appropriate to say, initially pre-bond, we didn't think about the fact that we would like to have this retractable seating in the auditorium. Currently, we have $1.3 million in our capital reserve. I mean, my recommendation, certainly, looking at the design and by pulling back some of the design that Ray showed tonight, some of the opportunities for reducing storage, part of what's great about the design that we originally saw is that really allows for the future expansion of Hillside. You had asked Ray about that in the beginning when he first presented. If we in fact shrink that square footage, it's impacting the stairway, which is then would potentially not allow you to expand later because that stairway would be not compliant enough to add classrooms in the future. So a lot of what this design ended up allowing for also was that idea of future expansion. So that wasn't really contemplated in the original design as much as when they got into full design, there was opportunities now to design for that. So part of the design includes the ability to have a much easier, much less expensive way to do an addition in the future. If you build it now, not for that design, if you ever wanted to do that, you're talking about a much more costly renovation in the future. The storage area, and even in the basement, can actually provide additional space that can be functioning space with very little renovation work that could be used as classroom space. So there are pieces that there isn't there's a fairly significant additional cost of this design, but there is a lot of opportunities. And there is some other work as we look at the total bond that I think we're pretty confident, well, not confident, we know we would need to make some other changes in some of the work. The Farragut Middle School Auditorium, we now know the last thing that was presented to us, some of the ideas we had, we're now kind of saying, well, that's really not what we need to do there. So, we feel confident that we would have to go into that project and decide to make some, still have plenty of money. There was like $2.4 million just for that renovation work. When you think about what we're getting for $2.5 million up here, and even if we scale back, some money off of that design, we have an elevator that's budgeted for this building, which we had hoped to replace this whole. It's really a lift. It's like a lift for food that's coming up from our service area. We already know that the cost of that, we had budgeted $400,000. It's going to be much below that, and really it's not in great shape, but no one's going on it. It's not like a risk to, it's like they were saying that I guess sometimes food drops off of it, so we can still replace that, but at a significant, we know we're going to have some. We haven't presented the entire scope of work, so you have to also think there'll be other things that we'll be able to bring back.
But just on this, just so I'm clear, because I'm hearing two different numbers being bandied about here. This says new addition budgeted 7.2. New addition SD 9.7, that's 2.5 million, but I keep hearing this $1 million number. What?
My $1 million number or just $1
I
million?
keep hearing, well, if it's $1 million over, 500 for the seats and 500 for the space for the seats or whatever it is, just help square for me how
so I think
we're talking about $1 million in one conversation, but this on the paper, and I realize it's a conservative estimate you're putting down, but just...
Yeah, so I think what I had asked Kevin to do is just to try to hit on some high-level numbers that were driving some of the costs. I mean, when you do a bond budget, you're just using a flat square footage number times what you think the building's going to be, and that really doesn't include maybe all the finishes you think you may end up wanting. So if you were to just kind of at a high level, if you took that number, the original number, which I think was 2,900 square feet, that's a larger, and you multiply that times $490 a square foot is what they're saying the cost per square foot is. That number, wait, I just had that number before. That right there is a significant part of the difference. And then if you just take that plus the seats and the extended bathrooms, you get up to that $2 million number pretty quickly. The number that Kevin's showing also contains the hard square, the cost estimate, I think, was 9.2, and then you have another 500,000 for construction contingency. That gets up to the 9.7.
General conditions.
No, you have construction contingency for 500. It's not, the general conditions are in 9.2, because that number even went up since when they went back the line.
9.1 was the first
right.
number, and then 9.7 was
right. So, I mean, right now, I mean, the idea and the hope would be, this is a new construction, so the unknowns are, there's less variables except for rock than doing a renovation to a building. So if, in fact, there's a good amount of contingency built into that 9.7 number, maybe exceeding, what the hard construction cost is budgeted at. So that includes, also additional, other contingencies included in that number. So, I mean, I think Kevin had mentioned before, it's not unusual for this number to be 7% higher than where it may end up being. So if you take out that conservative overestimate of 7%, coupled with square footage and seating, if we can kind of try to make some value engineering, get that difference back a little bit, and then in the hopes that it's a 1 point.
It's still $1 million.
It's still like 1.5 probably, I would say.
I have a question and a comment.
Sure.
So, time is of the essence.
Yes.
Is the facilities committee a part of this decision, or is this all?
No, this is like
decision?
a board. I mean, these are big decisions, and similar to when we did the last, again, I'll just reference the last bond as just a point of reference. The fields were significantly higher than our pre-bond estimate, and we did scale back work in that bond, about $800,000 worth of doors. I mean, you think about that was an $8.5 million bond. We ended up tapping almost 1.5 out of the capital reserve to finish that project and scaled back about $1 million worth of work elsewhere in this building. So, at the end of the day, we still stayed true to the bond. We did the doors that needed to be addressed. We had, I think, close to maybe $1 million worth of doors we had hoped to do.
Yeah, but that said, there is a part of me that feels like, couldn't we have known more of this front end instead of, I feel like we're in this, I personally feel like, it feels like we're between a rock and a hard place here. Like if I was working with an architect and I was doing something at my home and they came to me and said it's going to be an extra $1 million, I have to make a decision, can I do that? But it feels like everything here looks wonderful. Like how do we not want to do this?
That's what we're doing. So even at your home, and again, that would be similar, maybe not $1 million, but 20. I mean, I've done home renovations. It's always 20% higher than you think you're going to spend. I mean, it's similar to when you do work at the school when it's fully designed. And I think this was.
That's going to happen. It's a little frustrating to feel like why don't we plan for that?
Well, because you don't go into full design. You go into you're really only paying the architects to give you a sense of your needs, and then, I mean, we could have scaled it back, but we did give our architects, we want to go into full program.
I can't believe it ever gets to this stage with an architect, and they're saying, and it's going to be less than you went out for a bond. I don't think that ever happens. I'm just expressing my frustration and listening to this and feeling like, great, so now what are we going to do? How do we not come up with figure out some way?
But that's what we're doing. That's what we're figuring out.
I don't have all the answers, obviously, but I think there are two primary places. One is, do some of the other things change and shift? So, for example, there have been some conversations that there might not, for the cost involved, I haven't been in detail in these conversations, adding the second classroom in the back of the auditorium for a lot of money at the middle school might not provide that much bang for the buck.
That was like $800,000.
So that's
that would be
$800,000.
crazy.
So I think it's hard to have this conversation in a vacuum. I think that's what we're doing right now, but I think there's a bit of a, shuffling of stuff. And then, what's obviously hard for any of us here to know is just what is in this 9.7 number. There's a lot of assumptions in this number. And, anytime someone says, I've got a conservative, I've got middle of the road, I've got the best case, it's never best case, we know that. And, you hope it doesn't go as high as this. But, I guess all the places, Ray, that you pointed out that were green, that were the kill spots that, become draconian at some point, I guess we hold off on that conversation until we have to have that conversation.
Well, we have to have it now, because in order for them to create the next, to get to the next set of design documents so they can make them to construction.
So then how do we have, so if we say go tonight, don't kill any of those spaces.
Right.
We're sealing some deal in the future.
Yes.
And I don't think we know what deal we're sealing, though. And that's, I think, one of the issues here.
But we do know that it involves planning for an increase in staffing, I mean student enrollment.
Yeah.
So these spaces that could have been, decreased, that would have saved us some more money would have been sort of, a short-term solution to deal with the numbers, but long-term, the very reason why all the work is going into Hillside is to account for, additional classroom space. So that's the big gain here. And then the others...
But I think we have to talk about where is it coming from?
Yeah, well,
right?
and that's what I was trying to just say to what my recommendation, that's where I was kind of talking about the capital reserve fund, and that's, I'll be honest with you, I fully knew that we were going to need it at one point during this bond.
There's two things on the table right now that this whole, I think, a very preliminary conversation at the facilities meeting. We started talking about this, but we didn't go in detail. There's two things on the table. One, we're looking at a $2.5 million increase by these conservative estimates, and we haven't spoken about taking out 800 grand, a million, whatever, from another part of the, so we've essentially, we're looking at, and then the interior alterations are going up by $1 million here. I missed that.
But no, we've already pulled that back to budget. Yeah, that's already been resolved, because those were much, instead of doing.
Those were done earlier.
Yeah.
And it's gone through a longer
Yeah,
process.
that one's, we're already on budget for that work.
So what we're looking at here in conservative estimates, so what it feels like to me, and I don't want to speak for the whole board, is it feels like to me is like, you can keep the red, or take the olive colored picture.
Correct.
And if you take the red, it's 2.5 million.
Well, it's not going to, like Ray said, it's not going to close the entire gap, but I think if you cut those things out, that would probably be $1 million in savings, and then we would also have to eliminate the seating and probably some other aspects of the design.
So then just paint the picture. The picture is, if we go, is there something between those two, right? The cutting all the space?
It dramatically alters, go ahead.
If I may, if you go back to the slide here. So, This means you're not going to be programmed. If you do this, you will not be programmed, period.
Right.
You will not have storage for your cables. The auditorium cafeteria will be too small. You won't have the storage space in the basement.
So you're saying if you cut the red?
If you take that red out,
right,
you're not meeting program, period.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have the space in the cellar, and you lose the flexibility to add classrooms
in the future.
So Ray, that was a question I had actually. If you go with the expandable seating, what happens to the tables go to the basement?
I don't know how you make it work.
Then we would have to decide not to do the expandable seating at all. Like, that's what I'm saying. I think if we make these cuts, the expandable seating goes out the window. And we just set up chairs and we have
If
them
it did rolled work in. to have expandable seating, the tables go to the basement?
Well,
The seating?
No, they're hand in hand at this point. They're hand in hand.
Okay.
You need to cut both. Like, you couldn't kind of
You
make
bring
one
in
work.
seats and there's no slant, and it's a whole different game.
Yeah.
This was just an illustration of
Gotcha.
if
Okay.
we have to keep the exact same square footage that the bond had.
Yep.
The project doesn't, we don't believe the project is going to meet your program. I mean, we
Exactly.
can evaluate that again if we need to, but this will not work. This was an attempt to say, okay, what can we do to this to shrink wrap it, to meet program, a little tighter, but we could do it. And this saves, there are two parts here. Can you help me out here? This really doesn't make sense to get rid of, because you're creating that space by virtue of the excavation, and you need that space for storage. You might as well just
Develop
feed
it so you can
inhabit
build it, yeah.
and put the mechanical rooms there, because you can see what it does if we put the mechanical rooms in front of the classrooms. These classrooms become compromised.
Exactly.
They originally designed, they thought about putting the mechanicals on the roof, but that needs a flat roof. You can't have any slope on your roof.
Well, we have mechanical equipment on the roof.
Oh, and you do also, okay. Oh, okay, you do, okay.
Right.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
I understand the logic of that storage space on the basement level, but, and my question was mainly, could it be, are there windows? Like, I'm just trying to, I know it's the grade of the building, but could it be, are there windows? Could it potentially be utilized? No windows.
No, but it can be, very so.
Okay.
There's space, it's over that 770 square feet
Uh-huh.
minimum, so
Okay.
that there's space, if you were to do a renovation to that storage space and add the required windows, it could become classroom space in the future.
That's like a very,
the
like,
future.
cheap, yeah, like kind of reno we could do ourselves, probably.
So we could begin to shave a little bit back here and to shave a little here and in here a little bit. And we can take some square footage out of this and still hit program. But it's tight. It becomes tight, especially if you're anticipating more growth
Exactly.
to the building.
So
That
yeah.
tightness, that's about 600 square feet on the first floor, which I think Kevin, you said was, you know, if you use the square footage, the price per square footage number, that's about
1,000?
Oh, you had said 490 for the square footage number.
490.
Yeah, oh, okay, sorry.
So that's about 300,000 for that tightness, and we think it reduces the, you know, you still meet the program, but there are a couple things that become really tight. When the seats are out, your space between the seating, the front seat, and the proscenium is just about 10 feet, and we're accounting for the stage to spill over the proscenium. So your seats are right on top of the kids' performance right there. So you have less than that 10 feet really with the performance. In the design that we have now, we have glazing that looks out towards the woods on that, I don't know if you can point that out right. That corner over there, where the hatch is, so that's a glazed corner that looks out towards the woods and towards the path. So you're getting rid of that, which is a nice little addition there that really took into account the site and how you're walking up and the pathway into Hillside. And as we said before, the stairs are also pulled in, so you lose the ability for the hallway to the new, the future addition. So
Can I get clear where we just need to end up at the end of this meeting tonight?
They need to really, like I said, to stay on the timeline. That's what we've been talking, I kept mentioning that.
So they need to go away tonight.
With direction, with what we want.
Like red, no red.
Correct.
Or whatever.
Yes.
This is it.
Right. And that's why I'm, trying to give you a sense of, I know it feels a little bit that way, Doug, that you're like, wow, how am I making one without knowing everything? But unfortunately, the way
So then
these
let's just
projects
have the
work is just that
conversation.
way.
We have $2.5 million here. Let's figure out how we find that. Some of it is value engineering. We're sure we can get money out of value engineering, right? And some of it is,
we've talked about $500,000 for expandable seating. It sounds like you have an opinion that $500,000 is a number in excess of what's needed for expandable seating. What are we talking about? Are we talking about
$400,000 in expandable seating, $300,000 in expandable
I think you
seating.
can cut that number in half.
In half?
Right, based on the conversation you had?
No, I think 400,000 is
Oh,
reasonable. I think if you go to gym type seating, I mean, that's a much less comfortable seat, and that's, benches that don't have upholstery on them, then that's really cutting the number in half. So if you just want to accommodate the seating, you can do it, but if we still want the upholstered seats and benches, I think it's more like 400,000, so.
That's somewhere between 100 and 200,000 maybe there. Okay.
I don't think, I mean, they're going to tighten up where they can on this project. I think the reality of the matter is that, we have to look at the total of our bond that we've been authorized and find areas of savings and some of the scope of work, in addition to being realistic that if you want the building to be what you're seeing, you're going to have to authorize, we're going to have to talk about using that capital reserve money. And I think the idea is that's...
I think there's value in all of us right now actually figuring out how we're going to come up with the 2.5 million. What are the projected proposed numbers that come out of capital reserve? Where can we find money in value engineering? Where can we find money in change design at the middle school? I think we should really just not talk about this at a vague level. I think we should be very specific about where that...
Right, but I'm trying to do that, but I'm saying getting $100,000 out of seating is not going to be where you're going to get it. That
was 100,000.
Yeah.
We're down to 2.4 now. So let's keep going. So, what is, realistically, value engineering, I mean, what are we pulling out? I know you can't nail it right now, but what can we as a board feel comfortable
Give it a try.
if we're going to send you away saying, we're essentially, buying something that's bigger and different and well-designed, then we still,
So, what I think we'd like to do from here, and if you want to go through that process, I'd be happy to do that with you. But I think that we would like to be able to move forward with the idea that we have to be able to bring it back into budget, come up with our design and go through the DD estimate. Let us do our value engineering and come back to you and say, this is where we are at that DD, because I believe that's the time that we really need to focus on how we see the estimates as being over or under, not right now. And then we can say to you at that time, this is where we really think we're tracking in terms of the overall cost. These are the items that we think we need to value engineer to bring back into this, and we can have that conversation specifically about what those items are. And my hope is that we can come up with enough items that it's more than a 2.5 to give you some options, if need be, to say, I like this idea of changing or pulling this, but I don't want to change or pull that. Does that make sense?
I think so. I guess I'm trying to figure out how much are we at a point of no return right now? That's what I'm really trying to...
I think that based on where we are right now, if the board decided that they wanted to go with the plan that was presented last time, that you would have to look at what your options are in terms of additional financing. So one of them was what Maureen is suggesting is this capital reserve.
Which is a perfect source.
Which is the way...
But there's an order of magnitude to the capital reserve.
Sure.
And that's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm really trying to figure out, not a specifics conversations, but an order of magnitude conversation. I mean, 2.5 million on the capital reserve? What do we have in the capital?
No, but this is why I was going to go through it, and I've been saying numbers, but if you want to jot them down to see, 1.3 in the capital reserve as of today, $200,000 in the repair reserve, that gets you to $1.5 million. You have an elevator that was about $450,000 worth of cost, which is either we can scrap it completely because it's more or less a dumbwaiter that I'm even questioning why we even identified that as a project to do here. Or I think the they were talking about the other day that it would never, even if you were to redo the entire inside of it, it would be somewhere around 200,000. So we would have another 250,000 just off of that particular, not because we're scaling it back, because that's what it's going to cost us. So that gets you to 1.7 million. Then the idea would be to go into the middle school auditorium and say, we need to reduce the scope of work by about $400,000 or $5. Yeah, and I mean, the reality is these numbers are a little bit higher because that also includes a $500,000 additional contingency on top of it. So to me, I'm not concerned with getting to the 2.5 personally. I think like 2.1 is reasonable.
2.1,
And that's the number, yeah. He said like 500,000 or 600,000 over, he would say we were in budget right now. So that's my number I'm using.
Well, I think for the board to get comfortable, we probably have to just be a little clear about what that middle school rethinking is, because most of this board hasn't been a part of that
I have
conversation.
one other question before we get to the middle school rethink. What happens if we're in just a site prep and we start busting rock and we find that the actual site itself needs significantly more work than currently anticipated, and we've just allocated, all of our reserves?
Has that already
we
built in?
We believe we've assumed enough cubic yardage of rock removal in this budget for what the original plan was, which was to have that full basement. I'm comfortable we have the right number.
And so what soil boards will identify those assumptions?
There may be
We're doing
less than
tests.
that, and we're going to we have a geotechnical consultant coming in to verify, in fact, exactly how much rock there is. We might find that there's less. I'm pretty sure it's all.
And another option, even with the seating, if you wanted to try to even pull that out, you could do it as an alternate in the bid, and then just say, like, if we could afford to do it, we would then have to, like, a year or two after that, put money aside, like, in our...
I wasn't going to say anything about that tonight, but that would have been part of my conversation at DD's. You have to start thinking about your bid strategies. One of the ways that you can do that is alternates. So what that means is that you take certain chunks of the project that you could
do later,
live without, or do later. Maybe Joe can do it himself. We put it in as an alternate to the bids. So if the bids come in at a substantial savings on the overall budget, the board can then opt to choose to approve those alternates and put them back into the project. All right. So that's another strategic bid plan that we usually talk about. We still have a lot of time to talk in terms of next estimates and what it looks like, and then what it looks like before we go to SED in the first week of March. So there's still time there, but we just have to be cognizant of moving it through the process forward.
So, Maureen, do you want to talk a little bit about the thoughts around the middle school, or I don't know, Val?
Well, we've talked about auditoriums, and we talked about the auditorium in light of priorities.
Right.
We gain classroom space by following the design. And that's a big part of the hillside, renovation is to gain more classroom space, to have a larger kitchen, the anticipation of more students who are going to be eating food there, more storage space, bathrooms close to, areas that are potentially going to be available to the community to use, seating that's conducive to that. So really growing into a model. So going out with an $18.8 million bond, for that purpose, is, as I said, it might make us feel good now by making concessions, but long term, it really isn't wise. Putting a lot of money into an auditorium that it's only used for a few times, not nearly as much, is not wise.
Right.
So we already know that's where we're going to have the savings. And given what what we've seen, the maturity of the design and how this is really going to be a flagship. Typically, it's the high school that's the flagship. For us, it's going to be Hillside. Just from the standpoint of the design, and most people who are moving into the community, they're moving in to see, that's a major attraction. But most importantly, it's going to serve our needs long term. So we might as well do it right. And again, we talked over and over again about the savings, or, I mean, our opportunity to make concessions are going to be made at, you know, by looking at, you know, does it make sense for us to spend a lot of money in an auditorium that's only used for what?
Yeah.
When we have performances.
You know, even though it may be used a few times a day, but I think, you know, right from the beginning, even before this project, I will be honest, with that budget, I always, although that budget was designed, meaning the middle school budget, to do like a huge gut renovation to that space. Even Joe kept saying, I don't understand like why you wouldn't encapsulate some of these walls. Like, we found there's no asbestos, like obviously they're in poor shape, but like to do a gut renovation, he just felt as though even before we knew what Hillside was gonna cost, like we had a lot of discussion about this at the time of the bond, saying, God, it just seems like a lot of money for that space. Just to give you a comparison, we renovated the entire high school auditorium for about $700,000. So now we're talking about 2.5 to renovate a middle school auditorium with less seating capacity. It would be like a stretch to spend that much money there. Although it was in poor condition, the high school auditorium alone has another 250 seats. Seats are very expensive. So even just in terms of the functionality of that space, you know, we put a good amount of money into it. I think what Kevin had mentioned about Joe's team, the reason we only spent $700,000 is because, for the most part, our own guys did a good amount of that work. We bid it out separately. We were strategic in how to do it. Our original bid, just in the high school auditorium, when we did it, the last bond was $2.5 million, because they wanted to do a much like larger amount of work there. I would think everyone would agree that is a great, you know, I think the high school auditorium came out wonderful, and it received a lot of like new lighting, new sound, new seating, new flooring. The abatement alone in that room was $250,000. So when you think about what we actually put in for what we received, I think if we even think about doubling that budget at the middle school, it would still be a lot of money to do a lot of work.
So is the basic thought to just take the middle school as an auditorium and its current setting and just...
No, I think we're going to raise the floor. I think the idea would still be to level the floor in there and create...
One of the things that you guys haven't mentioned, but that you mentioned, I think, at the facilities meeting, was this idea that, you know, that classroom in the back, that would be that thing that the seats would go halfway. That was, you know, expensive to build this specialized seating like that. And then John Riss said,
didn't want to be there at all.
Really want to use that space and not near all my music colleagues. It just became this ghost space that would be used as the backstage, right? So that was a significant.
Yeah, because the idea was that if we don't need a classroom up there, then it was going to be a dressing room for the middle school, 2 shows they do a year. I mean, that's a big dollar amount to spend on that.
Just level and collapsible seating.
It would be very similar to the Hillside, what we're proposing to do at Hillside. Flat floor, it allows for a multi-purpose space, which is actually going to be create a better use of that space. It's really the right design, even beyond the cost, it's the right design. So I think the idea is that we know, again, I think it's still, we'll still have a nice chunk of money there, but if we were even to say, okay, we're going to reduce that by $500,000, you know, I think we could make that. I think if we had to work similar to what we had to do last time with the high school auditorium, I can tell you none of the theater people think they got short. I mean, maybe some of them do, but I think they're happy with how the high school auditorium turned out. A lot of that was money that had to be, you know, moved around to get all the things done in the last bond. So it's similar kind of process.
Just for my own thinking, what are the uses of the multipurpose space when it's not being used as an auditorium?
Right now, nothing. You mean the...
If I can just,
Sure.
from the programming phase, there were a lot of full grade level events that don't necessarily have a space, like Invention Dimension, or I think, I don't...
You're talking about the middle school, right?
Middle school.
Middle school. There are full grade level events. That
like the Greek festival.
That's right. Gail talked about and having...
but the reality is, do we need to spend $2.5 million to do that? And
you don't need that.
Right.
Yeah. You can create a...
But we're going to get a beautiful space still. I mean, you're going to, $1.5 million is a lot of money to put into that.
Community meeting of the middle school or of a grade.
Oh, yeah. It'll still serve all that purpose, because the idea would be to have a very similar setup, like some seating in there. But I think the idea that I was glad it got back to that, was that it really needs to function as a multi-use space, not just an auditorium. And really what was even being recommended was, part of that programming was that just setting it up as the auditorium as it, looks today would not serve us well, like in terms of the amount of money we would have invested for that design, for the use. Then you can't do all those grade wide, they wouldn't serve that purpose, huh?
The gyms right now, by middle school students sort of deemed to be in the Farragut complex, so like in the high school. So like when middle schoolers go to gym,
They go to Farragut, right?
use the little green gym.
I think depending on your grade level, you're in Farragut or you're in the green gym.
When the middle school,
They're not in the Cochrane.
They're not in the cockpit.
No.
they don't use the Farragut
They use the Farragut
for
for
physical
PE.
education.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, for PE. They use the Farragut, that's their main gym. If you call it, yeah, so,
So can I see if I understand?
yeah.
So if we approve the bigger version, the one that of course everybody would want, I mean, ideally,
Okay.
you will come back the next time with a few alternatives that would be cost saving in terms of, we could do the seating later, or we could decide on stadium seating, which would have there'd be adjustments like that to decide on. In addition, we're saying $500,000 would probably be saved, that we budgeted for the FMS auditorium
Right.
space. And
Well, it's
other
gonna have
areas
to,
that
I
would
mean,
be
that's,
jiggered.
yeah.
And you think that will put us back on budget, and anything over that, we could cover in the capital funds?
Correct.
Without feeling that by using those capital funds, we're shortchanging ourselves for some other problem?
No.
Or I don't know what happens if all that gets used.
If you see right now with Dobbs Ferries, I don't know if you read the Enterprise, many districts use them to like just lower the amount of money you're going to borrow, because I mean, it is there for that purpose. It's established solely for capital type projects. So in doing that though, they're clearing it out now before they've even gone through this whole process. So different people use it differently. I always like to hold it back because you're better off getting the authorization for the bigger bond. If we would have added that to the pre-bond budget, we would have had it earmarked and spent on something else. And today we would have nothing to go to. I mean, it's one thing about this bond, and with I'm not saying we'll have nothing left to do, but between the last bond and this bond, we are doing, we'll now have all new roofing, like things that would be like, oh God, we need another roof in a couple years, like things that we're having a new boiler put in this building, so we had our electric upgraded the last time, so those type of infrastructure things. Our heating system at Hillside was updated last time, so I would say that although we would always find a use for the capital reserve, I feel confident that, although because we're doing so much of that other also work that could be like an emergency, like especially having that boiler in this current bond, that, that would, if we didn't have that budgeted, I think I would be a little reluctant. We had talked a lot about not doing remember we had a lot of conversation about not doing the boiler in the bond and then saying, but we have the capital reserve. Well, now we do have the boiler in the bond. So we anything that was those big ticket items that we would be really like worried about, like depleting all of our money. I think in what we've seen, what they've presented to us, and again, I've had more time to kind of get used. I didn't know the exact dollar amount, but I knew it was going to be more expensive. And seeing the functionality of the space, I think it's really, I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice just because of what it leads for the future. And it's like, it's an intentional reprioritization of our funds, but I think we're close enough where we can make it work, but we would absolutely have to be very, very careful on all the rest of the work, and probably have Joe's group either, work, we'd have to be strategic about even maybe the middle school classroom, the music classrooms here, maybe having Joe's guys do some of the work, or figure out how to kind of, save money where we can in order to get this.
Any other concerns that may be big changes or tweaks to the design that would be begging for that 1.5 million besides this thing?
I think, Kevin speaks, I think the priorities, this building is such the priority, and although, I think we'll still be able to deliver, absolutely the middle school classrooms. Our roofing at Hillside came in right on project, number, so I think we'll be okay. It's the biggest of the the biggest project's going to have the biggest, scope creep. I mean, we know because we are adding, it's not like we're like, oh, we're the same exact size as pre-bond, and why is it so much more expensive? We are making a deliberate decision to accept this design and understanding that we think it is the right one. I think we knew, unfortunately, before bond, we knew what the space, we're like, we need a cafeteria, we need these things, but we really didn't fully think about the space, like, to this. It wasn't fully developed that we see now, and everything now makes so much sense that I as much as I just think anything less than that, I think it would be, it's a lot of money, but I think it's, we know why we're doing it. And we're saying, okay, we have these funds, but we have to make deliberate decisions on other work we're doing. That's true. Like, we can't, we need to be very, focused on what we decide to do at the middle school auditorium. Maybe that's where we do an alternate. Maybe we level the floor in there and say, you know what? We're going to not get the seating up there. We're going to have to wait a couple years to get I'm just now throwing out things. Like, we may have to make some of those hard decisions later, but Hillside will be done. It'll be done right. And then, there's always going to be another project. There's always going to be, work we're going to be budgeting and, putting money aside to do. So
And that's the purpose of the capital reserve.
Right. And that would be, the idea would be, we'd have to restart replenishing that capital reserve from there. I mean, but the capital reserve, I think, is appropriate for what, the changes that I think most people view as they make, it makes sense. It's the right design. So
let's just maybe check with the board here.
Yeah, sure.
What's everyone?
I just had one more question in terms of sort of immediate necessary costs that might have to go into the capital reserve. And we've been talking a lot about the technology infrastructure, and I don't know if that would be related to that at all.
Yeah, so I mean, could you use capital reserve to do that work? Yes, but what we typically do with our technology planning is we do installment purchase agreements for the actual equipment, and then there are some labor costs. So I was actually, when we would develop the scope of work for this bond, Kevin had said to me the other day, well, do you have your technology needs in the bond? I'm like, well, I'm not going to ever borrow money to buy a smart board that we're going to pay back in 18 years. That would, that would not, we didn't plan for that. So we have a certain amount of technology spending we do each year. And what's important is just to always be very thoughtful, like, okay, these things are happening, so you have to always prioritize. It's just a matter of making sure that's a big ticket item and how we're going to proceed with that replacement. So some of it would be done through an IPA, which is an installment purchase agreement. We do it through BOCES. We have 5 years to pay for the infrastructure, the endpoints and the controller and the wireless controllers and the racks and the switches. And then the only thing we would have to plan for is the labor that is required to do that work, which is about $50,000. That would be a one-time cost in that budget, but which would not be appropriate to be through a capital reserve fund. And technology, it's more short-term, so you could pay for it there, or you're allowed to, but you would never want to borrow money or capital reserve is usually for something that's like an infrastructure. You're getting 15 to 20 years of, depreciation on it. Anything technology, it's like 7 years depreciation. So it's really not the best way to do it anyway, because it's, more for like those long-term projects.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so question on the table is, do you support the red drawing or the olive drawing?
In the interior alterations, despite the cost opinion here under schematic design of 2.45, we think it's 1.48.
No, we already got it down. So what happened was he had given the entire, all the windows we had hoped or wanted, and Joe threw in a couple extra that weren't even being considered pre-bond, and they costed everything out for us. And that one was a matter of just pulling back some windows, flooring, and some repointing, right, Kevin?
Yeah, we didn't want to make any assumptions of any of that without talking to the board first.
Right. Well,
And
but
so
I mean,
that's why
H2M proposed it. I'm saying, I think on the slide I wrote it, we accept those recommendations, yeah.
And that's fine. We just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that the board was
Yep.
aware.
Right.
We didn't want to make any changes at all.
Right. We already
Right.
had. It's- And again, just with the flooring, interestingly, as much as the hallways, even Joe is like, the flooring in these other rooms is actually not even in bad shape. It's funny because sometimes just based on age, we identified it as like, wow, we should probably do some more flooring, but it actually is in good shape. So it isn't something we feel we're putting ourselves in any jeopardy by not doing.
Right, but we do feel strongly that you should do the corridors.
Yes, no, and that's why the corridors are in there, and they're within that 1.4 million. But Kevin, I feel like you must have priced out more floors than were in the original bond anyway. Is that true, Veronica, or no?
Yeah, the bond was
A dollar amount, yeah.
It was an allowance.
They were all allowances, so that.
So I think that it doesn't really
Beyond the allowances that, so I think, and I don't want to say anything, but my understanding was that a lot of the dollars associated with the original bond were just lump sum allowance.
No, that is true.
And then you backed into the design. And so what we tried to do is obviously more than what the original bond cost allowed us.
Right.
That's reaching for the stars. And so now what we have to do is we have to prioritize what really needs to be done and get back to the original cost that were involved.
So the 2.4, I would say, is,
process.
right, what ended up happening with that, our pre-bond, we were like, we'll do about $250,000 worth of floors. I think when Joe was walking the building, he's like, they priced out like more floors than were probably even, it wasn't like, we're not doing floors that we had thought about doing. It was like an overreach to see what we could get done, and then it came in way too high. So it's not, that one was a little bit different than the addition bond, I would say.
I'll go first. Where I am right now is saying, yes, go to the bigger drawing, yes, get to the next stage in the paperwork, the drawings, and then we go from there. We can cut down and say, don't add all this seating, and that's, $400,000 or whatever from Hillside for a while, which couldn't, I think it sounds like we can make it work by saying, yes, let's get to the next stage, and in the meantime, we can all do a lot more thinking about what makes sense, what little bits could be changed. If the change to the FMS auditorium does not sound detrimental, if that teacher did not want that classroom anyway, things like that. At first, I was feeling bad for the middle school and the changes that would happen in this building as if they were slighted, but when I hear that that's not really the vision that they need, then that makes it okay, and maybe there are some other, so I don't see a way around saying yes to the next step, at least, to get a little further along.
It's just important to make sure that the board realizes that it is an enhanced design from what was originally intended, and that's why there's going to be that cost X difference from what it was originally. And I think that's what Maureen is trying to say. These are the options to help you make that variance meet.
I guess the one thing I'll add, though, particularly for the purposes of the board, not the assembled, to the extent that we're discussing in the public, the tariffs, the cost escalation plus tariffs piece is X this design. That's an external factor,
exactly.
$500,000-$600,000,
that is true.
Which is going to exist anyway. So we should really be talking about 1.9.
Yes.
So it's just an important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a good point. And that would have happened no matter if we had the original design or not. And I think that is why, Kevin, we asked him to kind of just hit on those points, because there was an escalation in the square footage cost based upon tariffs, which nobody could have controlled. I mean, that was not something that was planned for when we created this design. So even in the old design, we would have seen an escalation in the square footage cost.
Right.
So you kind of have to say, okay, like, would you have scaled back that original design to get back into budget too? Because there is a certain percentage.
But 7.2.
No, I know.
Escalation in it.
No, I know. And honestly, the number even went up last week. They were going line by line. I was like, oh, good, it'll get tightened up, and it actually went up a bit. And I'm like, oh, we're going in the wrong direction. But I do think that it's, something to be considered. But I don't know how we can go to the next stage, because I think in order to if we went further and then they decided on a scale back design does not impact, you'd have to go and redevelop new designs which is going to push the time frame.
I think we're pretty much, from what I understand, we're at the red line right now.
We are.
Right, so this idea that we're going to be able to scale it back after we see the next cost estimate is kind of like if we feel we're not comfortable with making those decisions about Farragut Middle School and asking the public to authorize, the use of those reserve funds, I think then you have to say, scale back the design, because at the next, it is going to be too late, and they'll have to redevelop their designs, which will push the entire project off. So that's where everything, there's so much work that goes into
Whatever we
it.
decide, if we change after now, there's a high degree of likelihood we're not breaking ground until the summer of 2021.
Correct. And then there's a cost to do that, and a cost to professional services contracts, which won't be as, much as the 1.6,
Okay,
but it could
let's try
be
to
600 or
decide what we're
700.
doing. Yeah, well, I'm in agreement with what Allison said. I guess the one thing I would ask maybe Valerie is if you would speak with Gail and middle school people about the auditorium, and let's understand, engage them in the conversation a little bit and find out really what they want there. And because I agree, I don't want to feel like we're doing this whole thing, and it's like that piece always gets short shrift, and it's not the most important property in the school district, but if we're going to do something, let's do something that makes sense. Maybe not,
Well, I mean, and I hear what you're saying, and of course, we always engage with the people at the building, but there are the program drives the needs of the building, and you have to, at times.
I'm saying, if Valerie could speak, look, program drove this whole design.
Correct.
I mean.
No, but I'm saying that the architects will they're going to also work with the middle school team, as they've been doing, with, understanding, I think those needs, some of what was presented in just the classroom as an example, Doug, like that was something that wasn't meeting their needs, so that was going to come out. But the reality is, I think you have to understand that we're not going to make a decision, say it's going to be scaled back, as we did with the high school auditorium. We had to make that decision if we wanted the fields and the way they were designed, because even that seating at the fields was an uptick of $400,000 over regular seating, but everyone, it had to be cement. So they were like cost decisions made based upon like community feedback that were very costly, that scale back other designs in the building. But if you ask people, there's a point we have to make a decision here that it's going to be, we're going to have to save money on it, or else you can't, that, you just have to.
So I want to make sure we hear from everybody. Did you finish your thought, Jody?
Yes, I did.
I feel comfortable moving ahead with the larger plan at Hillside. I think, and with the mindset of fully knowing that we're going to have to find cost savings in other elements of the bond. Because I feel like we've gotten very strong community support for the enhanced design that has been proposed. And it definitely, it sets the building up for future capacity. And for those two reasons, I think that it's wise to continue on the path of using the design as intended and not scaling it back, and finding other ways of spending where we can scale back.
The only thing about that, though, is that, yes, we've gotten community support, but I think that's without maybe an awareness that it was going to cost an extra amount of money. So I think we have to be cognizant of that.
Well, we have been discussing it.
Okay.
I mean, I concur with what others have expressed. I mean, my only reservation anytime I hear about the price differentials is making sure that we're not breaking faith with what we've held out to the community, that people don't lose faith, that we're not being diligent in terms of making sure that we're adhering to the plan that has been held out to the community, and at the same time that the things that we held out in terms of how each of the sites was going to benefit, as Allison pointed to, that's something that's actually felt. Because I think, when having gone through the bond discussion, it did seem that people were very concerned about Hillside reaping all the benefits of the bond, or the grand bulk of it. And so I just want to make sure that, as we approve going on to the next step, that we're just cognizant that people are on the same page as best as possible. So that's my thought.
Tim?
Yeah, no, look, I'm in agreement with everyone here. I mean, I think if there's one thing that comes out of this discussion, we know as a group the finite nature of our resources. We have a certain amount of bond money. We have a certain amount of capital reserve money. I think it's unwise to earmark all of the capital reserve money in a single shot, because this project is a 15-month construction project with uncertainties that have the potential to come up. So I caution us collectively against doing that. I think what everyone here needs to know is that they have the green light to go back and value engineer while it's simultaneously sticking with the red plan, if you will. So I'm in support of that. You know, and I'm certainly appreciative of all the pro-hillside arguments. This is a very compelling schematic. I mean, I can imagine being an elementary student and being this school as opposed to the existing school. This is a very nice, very impressive schematic. So I'm supportive and admittedly nervous about our ability to fund it and execute it.
Yeah.
I'm supportive as well for all the reasons that everyone has said, and you know, I again, same thing, 1.5 million that we're kind of baking in here, the repair reserves, the and maybe it turns out that there's really a way to get 900,000 out of the middle school. I mean, I don't know what Joe has up his sleeves from a not gut renovating perspective, or what can happen in the music rooms, but I think, you know, as we move forward with this, and hopefully there's some real value engineering tricks up your sleeve, you know, when it comes down to it, I think we need to have these and a few tricks we probably even haven't discussed here up our sleeve, because if we seem to be right up against it with all the tricks here.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, if we could find a couple more tricks, some of Joe's, you know, Joe's team over the course of several years, if we have to, and hopefully we don't have to, I think that, you know, I feel comfortable that we move forward with that, the current, you know, design, and, you know, if it means, you know, hard benches as opposed to padded seating for a couple $100,000.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
If they're little kids' tushes.
It may be. It literally may be.
Yeah, absolutely.
These
Parents,
are adults.
too, isn't it?
Parents,
It's adults.
they want to use that
Tough
space
enough.
beyond
Come on.
school day.
Well, exactly,
that much
but, you
money?
know, we'll have to,
That much money?
well, so I think we just have to have all the options on the table, so that if we run into a challenge, we can execute against it. We don't have some drastic thing that has to happen. I think most drastic being, we have to push it out by another year because we have to go back to the drawing board. So it seems like everyone in the room is on the same page of the challenges that we're up against. And, you know.
We don't need to vote on that.
I don't think we have to vote.
No, it's not a vote. It's just ready to go.
I think you just have to give a general, I mean,
Yeah.
the bottom line is like what I'm, you know, what I shared tonight, that is that's the reality. What we're gonna move forward, no, we'll have to save money in other areas. That's just what it is. And also, but the use of the capital reserve does have to, because that will have to go on the, on the budget
On the
vote
May
to May. We'll have to, similar to what we've done with the last one, you just advertise and what you're using that money for.
Yep.
That's all.
Right. That vote would be in May?
It would be, I would do it on I did it the same time as I did on the ballot with the budget. As long as, I mean, we had a lot of favorable results. I think people understand that as long as it doesn't raise their taxes, like, they're comfortable, like, that's the point of having it. You know, and to be honest with you, we never had one before, so I don't, you know, we managed all those years without it. It really is for this type of use, to be honest with you.
So when should we expect updated numbers?
Updated numbers, Kevin?
So, I gotta go back to the schedule.
Doesn't this feel like stuff you should have? I said, doesn't it feel like stuff you should have executive content before here? Because it seems really hard. I feel like we should have another meeting like next week or something. I have no idea. We just bit off more than we could chew.
So there it is. Once the DDs are completed at the end of this month, then we'll go through another cost opinion, like that. And that'll take another 3 weeks or so. So it was about 6 weeks, and we'll be back to the next.
November 11th deadline? There was a November 11th deadline, wasn't there? Or something?
That's
The
for
11th is-
that's for the infrastructure.
Yeah, for the infrastructure.
So we're planning on sending it out to SED.
Yeah, that's not in question.
Okay. And so then are we looking at like the 11, 18,
Yes.
where, mid-December, you said?
Yeah, it'll be a mid-December.
It's just the purchasing them that's a lot of the cost.
And then we'll do it one more time.
I don't know if you had to add it to extension or something.
Okay.
It would really.
We're good, Maureen?
Yeah, we're
Yes.
good. You guys can stay with the rest of our meeting if you want to punish yourselves, or you can get going.
So the design right behind you is what we're proceeding with, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, it was the one with the red on it.
This is where we are currently.
Yes.
What we have been proceeding with.
Yes.
And we are continuing to proceed.
Yeah, and that's what was,
Right.
that's what's priced up.
But looking into different seating options so that we could pick a lower
Yes, we're going to look
price.
at a number of different items.
A few different price points.
Hard benches for everybody.
Yeah. Bring your own cushion. BYOC.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
PTSA provides cushions for everybody.
She always changes it, always, yeah.
I feel
Drove 5.5 hours from DC.
Well, you were here for the.
Yeah, but the one thing I just, when people vote on a bond, the bond council, you voted on the elements of the bond that include like certain work, and it's very general, but it has to include the.
Thank you.
They do have.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. To be honest with you, part of that, I also recall, if we didn't put the first of all, I think the cafeteria should be there. We wouldn't have gotten any done.
Okay, let's get through this.
We wouldn't have been able to go successful because.
Good night. Thank you so much.
We would have had.
Okay, guys, we got a bunch of stuff to just continue moving through here. Jody's got to leave.
Totally faded.
Super fast, please.
Yeah, so business items. Does anyone have any questions about 1 through 18 on business items?
I have an answer to.
Yeah, I hate to ask the question.
No, so it was about the mediation versus arbitration. You always want the ability to mediate, because that's just an easier way. It doesn't mean then you couldn't arbitrate, go into arbitration on it, but our attorney always prefers to have an ability to mediate with both parties, and that's typically.
You say our attorney, just because you said it was.
Keenan Bean.
Keenan Bean.
Yeah, they write these agreements.
Okay, so
and
just making sure it's.
Stephanie.
No, Stephanie Burns is the business person.
Okay, all right, different Stephanie, but Keenan Bean's on.
Yeah, they do all of our, every contract you see in front of you, except if it's like a
And their
one-page.
non-binding mediation is preferred for them.
Correct.
versus arbitration. Okay, that's all I wanted,
Yep.
because, yeah, very good.
That's the preference.
Just real quickly, what's Panorama Education?
That's the school
yeah.
climate survey that we talked about administering to students in 6 through 12 and then educators. It helps us to build our PBIS plans, to better understand some issues that are maybe at the root cause of some of the behaviors.
Okay.
You guys want to jump through?
Any further questions on business items 1 through 18 that maybe haven't gotten answered yet? No. Do I have a motion to approve business items 1 through 18?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. That's it, right? Just A. B, 5B, personnel. So let me just look at 5A, B, and C, and D. Does anybody have any questions about personnel under 5A through D?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to comment again that I think it's a wise and great move for the district to continue to take interns in the classroom.
So do I have a motion to approve 5A through D?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Minutes. Anybody have any questions or changes to the minutes from October 7th? I think it says October 21 here, Janine. So that just has to be, it just says meeting. I
The
said
meeting of
minutes
the
at bottom.
21st, in the minutes.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve minutes from the October 7 meeting?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Let's see, committee reports. There's a lot of detail. Let's see. So, yeah, there's a lot of detail here. Is there anyone on the Student Board Liaison Committee that wants to point out anything in particular that thinks is particularly...
It was very nice to meet with the whole student union, and the 2 teacher reps were there as well.
And Lou?
Yep. And our superintendent and assistant superintendent. And they want to get a lot done. They really do. So it's a matter of making some priorities for them and following through. I think it's, as we know, it's always easy to generate ideas, but then it's finding really meaningful ones that people want to get behind. But they want to find things that make school more fun to come to, and that's one side. And the other side is making some meaningful change. And then Mr. Adipietro inserted, let's talk about also responsible behavior, because attendance at PAD has been quite high, especially after homecoming, with a few students, needing to be treated. And so, opening up that conversation, including the youth advocacy survey that we discussed in our last board meeting, Dr. Henning Piedmont mentioned, maybe that's a good thing for them to discuss, or for the high school community to discuss, and to see what kind of alternatives they can come up with that really might stick, at least as alternatives sometimes.
And they also mentioned that they had taken surveys, but had never gotten any of the results back. So there was a thought that perhaps if the students knew, how the feedback was going to be used, or what purpose, what was the whole purpose of taking the survey, that would also lead to potentially them being a little more serious about it. And if in fact, we don't know yet, because that'll be interesting when we do return, and they've had time to process this as a student government group, what recommendations they have with regards to potentially, and if the conditions were not favorable for the survey being taken seriously, they can put forth some recommendations. If they feel that there's, that perhaps some students might have not known, had they answered, honestly, that perhaps the outcome would have been very different, and if and yet the impact in terms of the reputation of the high school and the community is really been impacted by potentially, if any of this information is inaccurate, and students, I think, are aware that wow, if we'd only known. But again, we don't know yet, because they're going to talk about it and bring that back. I think that was one of the most useful parts of this whole venture, is getting their feedback and their input. So stay tuned for that.
And the expectation of them doing that continually on a variety of issues. Diversity Committee, Sylvia.
Yep, I was there. The only thing that I would say is that Jenny's pretty much covered everything that was, I mean, there's not really anything that I can flesh out that she didn't already, or the students didn't already raise. It's, consistently the best attended committee that I've been a part of. Full table of administrators, parents, people just from different stakeholders who, and I thought that the tone of this particular conversation was particularly constructive and forward-thinking, so I think we really set a good tone in the way that Janice and Karen Hammernes facilitated the meeting. It really elicited a lot of feedback from all the people who were present, and as Jenny said during her presentation, I think the thought was really focusing not so much on the tactical work, but what it is day to day that people are going to be doing in the classrooms and how diversity is going to be lived out. So I don't know, I thought it was a very positive, tone setting for the year going forward. So truly, the kids also had a lot of voice in the meeting, as they always have had in meetings of this kind of this nature. So Melissa and Valerie were both there, so they could add anything, but I really do think that Janice covered almost everything that's noted in these minutes, or the kids did when they were here and present, so.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. No public comment. Does the board have any final comments? Once, going twice. No comments. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, meeting adjourned.